Okay. Oh, I need to grab my microphone. Let's do that. So, okay, can everybody hear me all right? Okay, so this is kind of weird because I'm talking to you guys, but I'm also talking to people on YouTube. So I'm kind of going to be dividing my time. So if I'm ignoring you on YouTube, I'm sorry. I've got an in-person audience here also. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you're on the Save Our Bluffs website, there's a link down below that will allow you to go and watch it on YouTube directly if you're having any issues with Save Our Bluffs. And if you want to do chatting at the end, we will use the live chat to ask questions of the presenters after all the presenters are finished speaking. So we'll take questions at the very end. So that goes for you guys also. If you can hold your questions until all the speakers are finished, we will take questions at the very end. My name is Carla Bloom. I'm the Executive Director of the International Owl Center. I've lived in Houston County my entire life. I've worked for the DNR, I've worked for the city, now run a nonprofit, lived in Houston for 27 or some years now, quite a while. So originally from Spring Grove. So Houston County is where I love to be. I have traveled, and every time I'm very happy to come home because it's absolutely beautiful here. Let me bring up my PowerPoint presentation and share my screen. Hopefully this will work for everybody. Okay. Hide this. There's so many controls. Oh, wait a minute. I want to hide the video first. There we go. And then hide the controls. There. Okay, now it should look good for the people in person and the people on YouTube. Does that look all right, Anna? Yeah. We have Control Central back behind the curtain hiding there. There is tech support here. So a little bit about the background of this project. The idea was brought forth, I think about 2009 to do, the original idea was that it would be an OHV area owned and operated by the DNR on the same land that we're talking about right now. And that's how the idea was pitched to the city, to the chamber. There was discussions with, I think they went to the county commissioners and kind of pitched it to a bunch of ideas. And then somewhere along the way, the idea switched and that wasn't going to work. And so then the concept became the city would buy and own the property and it would be maintained as a grant and aid trail. So similar to the snowmobile trails where you have clubs that do the building and maintenance of the project. And then has veered off since then. So a little bit about our area. Plug this in. Good thing I'm going first, so the rest of you, I've got it all worked out for. Come on. There we go. So we're in the Blufflands area of Minnesota, which is this beautiful hilly part of the state. And for those of you who have lived here your whole life, you may not realize how special this part of the state is. So we have just under 3% of the state's area, but we harbor almost 40% of the state's rare species. So what we've got here is really important and very biologically significant here compared to other places in the state. We actually harbor the highest number of rare species and specifically species that occur here and not elsewhere in the state than any other landscape type in the state of Minnesota, according to DNR records. So South Park, if you're not familiar, is the bluff on the hill up here. And it has bedrock bluff prairies in it along the south and west slopes. And they are one of the more rare habitat types in the state. So they're listed according to the DNR as vulnerable to extirpation. So extirpation is just a fancy word that means extinct within the state of Minnesota. And I'll mention right now that Scott Letty is not going to be able to be here with us tonight to talk about prairie. He had a very serious family emergency and he could not be here tonight. And one of the things that he wanted to bring up and speak about is how what this used to be like here. So the vegetation maps and the records from the 1850s show that this area was almost very, very heavily prairie, an enormous amount of prairie here, not many trees at all. And now we're down to just these teeny weeny pockets on the south and west facing bluffs. That's all that's left. So in the state of Minnesota, we have lost not 50% of prairie, not 75% of prairie, not 90% of prairie, but about 99% of all the prairie in the state. So this is extremely rare habitat and harbors very rare species that don't have anywhere else to go. They just have these little pockets of land. So we also have oak forests and maple basswood forests, depending on the slopes of the hills. This is a map that the DNR provided for me. We have a larger version over there printed out. Hopefully you can kind of see that up there. Right along, let me do this. We'll show you where, let's get some bearings here. So this is where the former bunkhouse was over here. I can use the pointer also. Or can you see you see that okay in person? Okay, there we go. So this is the area where the trail access is going to be. This is where South Park is. If you're going up Grant Street and then you pop down into the archery range here, the campsite is there. And for reference, I think everybody knew where Dave Rowe lives, where Anna lives now, is over on this part right over here. So just to get your bearings, and then 76 over here and County Road 4 to the south. So speaking of prairie, this is where the trails are going to go on the site. But we have a spot of prairie there that's decent quality prairie, a big spot there of decent quality prairie, a spot there, and a spot there. But basically everything between these spots that interconnects is also prairie, just not as in good of shape as the yellow spots that I marked are. But you'll notice that trails are pretty much going through all of the prairie spots. And I'll give you, I mean, it's kind of jumping ahead, but I'll give you a little tour of what this is. So this pinkish one is the entrance trail, which will be 17.5 feet wide so that it can accommodate two-way traffic. And it comes in kind of on the flat here and then goes up onto the hillside here. And then once we get to the white trails are 8.75 feet wide. And those are for Jeeps or off-road trucks, four-wheelers, side-by-sides, and dirt bikes. So I'm not going to use the former OHM and OHV and ORV because we all get confused. So everybody knows what Jeeps are and side-by-sides and ATVs and dirt bikes. So I'll just stick. North is up, south is down here. So the white trails are 8.75 feet wide, and those are for everybody. So those are for Jeeps, four-wheelers, dirt bikes. The red one here and the red one over here are for dirt bikes only. So those are only 3 feet wide. And then the purple one over here is a technical trail that's meant to be very difficult and challenging. So that one is they just say it's going to be less than 8.75 feet. And this is where I got really confused and I had to ask for clarification from the DNR. The purple one they said is for ORV, which is Jeeps and trucks, and it's for dirt bikes, the OHM, but it is not for ATVs or side-by-sides because it would be too dangerous for them to go on. I'm not sure how you keep them off if it's wide enough to have a Jeep on it. But these are quite steep slopes over here. And no real access. So anyway, oh, and the green spot, I missed the green spot. This little green spot is a rock crawl area. So this is a rocky area over here. There used to be a quarry up here. And this is all vegetated right now, but this will just be a free for all spot where the Jeeps can climb up and down the hills as they want. So before the city proceeded with buying any land, the first step was to have a DNR area team review. So they had resource specialists from this area come on site, walk around, and basically give their comments about what they thought about the potential of an OHV trail in this area. So these are not comments that were shared with the public. These are comments that I did a data request to get. So I have the actual quotes from the field staff. I know the field staff, so I had talked to them and knew their feelings. So I knew they had submitted comments, so I was able to formally request those. So these are direct quotes from their field staff in 2010 before anything was purchased. Trails should not be placed on south and west facing slopes, as that would completely degrade these prairie areas and negatively impact any potential rattlesnake dens by disrupting the rock structure. So as we saw, they're definitely on the south and west facing slopes. Leaving blocks of forest without trails will help keep some of the habitat intact and keep some of the invasives from completely taking over. So one of the known quantities for certain is the trails will bring invasive species on site. There are invasive species on site, but there are some key ones that we do not have on site. We do not have garlic mustard on this site. Garlic mustard is fantastic at coming in and spreading like wildfire and taking over the understory of forest canopy. And that changes everything in the forest. So leaving large blocks of forest is going to help mitigate that to some degree, which wasn't done in the plan. The terrain of the property is rugged. That, combined with highly erodible soils, does not make the proposed use very compatible. So this is Andy, who you may have seen up front, standing on a, the picture doesn't do it justice, but it's a very steep hillside. And as she's standing there, the soil is literally crumbling and rolling down the hill beneath her foot. And this is one of the spots where one of the trails is going to go. Some uses, such as technical rock hopping and gully traversing, are probably not compatible with the site and sustainability. So they are going to be doing the rock hopping in that one particular area. And another thought was a standard grant and aid approach is not going to work here. So the original idea was the DNR would own and maintain it. Grant and aid is kind of a different thing because you're looking at volunteers doing maintenance on a very difficult site. So they didn't feel that that was an approach that was going to work. It seems counterproductive to be funding a project that will significantly contribute to a problem, erosion, that we're spending a lot of time and money to resolve. I mean, that's kind of what Department of Natural Resources, we think about that. So they feel like, well, why should we be doing something that is potentially probably going to harm the environment when we're telling other people not to? So, and I should mention, all these photos are from South Park. They're not from other places. And another staff did reiterate the concern of DNR supporting this and compromising their credibility when talking to landowners about erosion. So those comments were gathered together, sent up to St. Paul, and the people there put their heads together and said, we can do it. We just need to have expert trail builders come in. So they hired Trails Unlimited, which is an enterprise unit, or was at that time an enterprise unit of the Forest Service. So they came in, spent a bunch of time on site, designed the layout that we saw, and did a long report. And I hope that most of you have read that report. It's on the DNR website, and it's got a lot of great information, and it's something that anybody who's interested in this project should read, because those are the people who designed the trail. They know what they're doing. They've done a lot of this stuff before. One of their comments, though, was about noise, which is one of the concerns of the community here, because this is not a standard trail that's on the flat. It's on a bluff elevated over town, which if you want to transmit sound into town, that is the ideal way to do it. And it's kind of shaped like an amphitheater also. When they were up there, they commented, we could hear the kids playing on the sports field at the school down below us. And they realized how easy that sound is transmitting from town up onto the bluff. So they quoted what the state noise standards are. And these are requirements that the city has to comply with. And said this is a low level that might be difficult for OHV machines to achieve at the city of Houston doorsteps. So they were red flagging that this might be an issue that probably should be looked at. Just veering off a little bit, and then besides the state laws about noise, it would be illegal for the city to put in the trail if it was going to violate state noise standards. That would violate law if the city did that. So that's why the sound study is very important. But the city also has a noise ordinance that says any noise that precludes their enjoyment of property or affects their property's value. So that's even something more restrictive than what the state noise standards are. So that's something that also needs to be taken into consideration, because the trail does go quite close to several properties, and sound in these bluffs, for those of you who have lived around here, sound does weird things. It doesn't necessarily, it's not linear, it bounces around and it can be very unpredictable. A few of their other notes, wet weather management will be an issue. These are weak soils for frequent vehicle traffic. And the reduced width and two-way traffic shall require multiple pullouts where possible every 500 feet or so to allow two-way traffic to pass. So all of those trails that are 8.75 feet wide, every 500 feet will balloon out into basically 17.5 feet wide. So two vehicles, two Jeeps can pass. So this, I don't know if you can see that well, this is a magnificent image put together by Craig Stanislawski from Wild Exhibit. He had the GPS locations, and it's superimposed on a Google Earth image of this. So if you can see this, this gives you a much better idea than a two-dimensional map. So we have, here's my cursor. Here's where the trail comes in without much elevation change there, and then it goes up the side of the hill here. So this is still 17.5 feet wide. Coming up here, all the way up to here is 17.5 feet wide. And then it splits into the 8.75 foot wide areas and goes around here. This is a, this one should be the 3 foot wide motorcycle track. In this green area that's a little bit hard to see is the rock crawl area. That's 0.8 of an acre here where the trucks can just kind of go wherever they want. And this is where the dirt bike track goes over here. This is just dirt bikes over here. And then you can see it goes back and forth on the north slope of the hill, which is where the concern is for the noise, and also the ridge. Once you get to the back slope, the noise isn't going to be a concern at all for town, but that's where the concern for habitat is. So you can kind of see a little bit here, but it's going directly through several of these best prairie spots here where we literally have trucks going through the middle of small remnant bluff prairies. And this over here is also prairie here on the back side of that hill. So one of the things that needed to happen for this project to move forward was the original South Park that the city bought back in, I think, 1974 was with LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars. And that apparently comes with some permanent strings attached to it. And that required a formal change of use to allow motorized vehicles in the park. So this is a little bit complicated here. But as it stood, they couldn't use motorized vehicles in the park. So the National Park Service administers this through the Minnesota DNR, and they determined that to allow motorized vehicle use, they had to go through an environmental assessment. Okay, so what do we think of when we think of an environmental assessment? We kind of assume, okay, people are going to go down there, they're going to look for rare habitats and rare species and those kinds of things. They don't. Turns out one person came on site one day and put noise meters in the park, not in the residential areas, and said, here's the current noise level. That was the only person that came on site, other than they contracted out the archaeological study. Somebody came and did an archaeological study on the 20% or less slopes, which is only just the very bottom of the hills. So that was all anybody came on site. Everything else was, they just sat in an office and looked things up. The conclusion, I was quite shocked to read. The assessments indicate impacts are either negligible or not applicable as a result of adding an additional recreation land use designation to the southern 80-acre portion of the park. I thought, how is that possible? I've been up there. I've done programs up there. I know what this is just not logical. But if you read the environmental assessment, and please do, I mean, everybody concerned about this on either side should read the environmental assessment. When you're doing research, the conclusion doesn't mean anything without knowing what the methods are. So the methods in this one and the basis of the study was there aren't any trails on the site. So if you allow this use, there's going to be no impact because there's not a trail there. So there was no attempt at all to assess what would happen if a tire touched the ground in the park. And you're kind of left scratching your head going, what? We paid $25,000 for that study? Wow, and it was accepted? Okay. So when I started researching how environmental assessments are supposed to be done, they're done differently in different departments. So this is a National Park Service, which is part of the Department of Interior, National NEPA review, so National Environmental Policy Act review. And in their handbook, they specifically say they have to take into account activities not yet undertaken, but sufficiently likely to occur, that a responsible official of ordinary prudence would take such activities into account in reaching a decision. And I think it's fair to say pretty much everybody assumes that if you allow motorized vehicle use, you're going to have motorized vehicles because that's the plan, right? So legally, they had to assess that. They didn't do it. Also, they legally had to do a historical literature search to see, we've had CCC activities around here. Are there structures there? The Trails Unlimited documents show a structure. I don't even know where it is. Obviously, something happened there. Nobody knows. They didn't do any historical literature searches. They also were supposed to give agency responses to all substantive comments that were given during the public comment period. There weren't any responses to the comments from the public comment period. And then the final thing that has to happen at the end of a federal environmental assessment is, if they're going to move forward, and issue a finding of no significant impact, which is a FONSI. It's an official statement signed by some official, unless they decide not to do the project or do more thorough environmental review. They didn't do any of these, and it was accepted, which I found a little bit surprising. So I brought this information, sent an email to the National Park Service and the DNR, the person who was administering this. And I'm like, you didn't follow procedure. You didn't assess motorized vehicle use. You didn't do these things. And their response was, basically, we discussed it and we're not going to do anything, because you're getting an FRTP grant. So that's a Federal Recreation Trail Program grant. So that triggers another level of NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act review. So it was going to go through that review. Okay, yay, we're going to have some review. So, but this is through the Federal Highway Administration. They do it differently than the National Park Service. So their review, you query the NHIS database. So that's the Natural Heritage Information System database that the state maintains for rare species, known locations of rare species. So the information in there is just what somebody has put there. So if nobody's gone on site, they're not going to have any data. And for the private property here, I wouldn't assume they would have data for that. Most of the data is probably from the 1993 County Biological Survey that was done a long time ago, and that would not have been a thorough survey of everything. Comply with water and wetland regulations, a Section 106 cultural review, so that's the archaeological review that's also supposed to have the historical review also. An environmental assessment statement, which is different from what we've seen before, and comply with Minnesota environmental review laws. So the NHIS review, as I mentioned, is not somebody going on site and looking for rare stuff. It's just, let's look in the database and see what we find in the database. So basically, if nobody went there, it's like me standing here and saying, I'm not aware that anybody is in here. And then that's the report, because I didn't look. And so that's what it boils down to. It's only what happens to be in there. They're not sending somebody else to look. So that's where my concern was, because I know there's rare species there. So myself and a few others have gone on site, and we are working on adding more information to that database so it's more accurate. So thus far, we found a state threatened plant species, Scutellaria ovata. It's the ovate-leaved skullcap. Timber rattlesnakes, although they haven't been seen officially in the park, there's lots of reports over the years from those of you that live near South Park, I'm sure have dealt with them. So they're clustered around one part of South Park. And the only place they could be coming from is South Park. So anybody with logic would tell you they are there. They're just difficult to see, and there aren't people there much. So those are state threatened species. Special concern species, the database already listed purple cliffbrake and ginseng. I found swamp white oak up there, weirdly enough, and I'm pretty sure there's Kentucky coffee tree up there. I just have to find the location on that. So that's a special concern species. And we've documented at least 11 species of greatest conservation need. So this is telling you this is a biologically significant hillside here. And it's not like every other hill everywhere else. So the environmental assessment statement was kind of what got me wound up at a council meeting earlier this year when I heard that the city council was going to approve it, because I read it. The environmental assessment statement is filled out by the clubs, not by the DNR, not by anybody with environmental background. They just fill it out themselves and nobody checks. So this is what was on the environmental assessment statement that was sent in. There were no threatened or endangered wildlife found. The sound levels anticipated will meet the MPCA and federal sound level requirements. There's no decreased quality of life anticipated from the project sound levels. That's not based on anything. And the Trails Unlimited folks said, hey, this might be a problem. This one ought to get everybody to laugh. No impact to community cohesion. Yep. No canopy degradation is anticipated. So that's tree canopy. But if you're cutting a 17.5-foot wide swath onto the side of a steep hill, I'm pretty sure there's going to be loss of tree canopy, especially where the rock crawl area is. There will be minimal impact to wildlife as the trails are within the city of Houston with the normal movement of people and vehicles near the trail. If you've been in South Park, there aren't people or vehicles anywhere near the wildlife up there. They're completely isolated. They aren't used to being around people at all. But it was accepted. So then the mandatory environmental review. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that are mandatory environmental review categories. And one of those is 80 or more acres of OHV area on forested or other naturally vegetated landscape. So obviously we have 120 new acres of dedicated OHV land purchased with motorized vehicle funds. And they said it doesn't qualify because it's an existing multi-use park that we're just adding trails to. Like, no, 120 acres was purchased just for this, not for anything else. And they said, well, it could be used for something else. I said, no, it can't. The deed, all the deeds for the property specifically say the property may only be used for a motorized recreation trail system. That doesn't sound very multi-use to me. But the DNR's official stance is it's a trail system, not an OHV area, because a trail system only has to be at least 25 miles long to do environmental review. So our 7.5-mile trail doesn't count. They only consider it an OHV rec area when it's the only use, like the Iron Range OHV. Mind you, we have higher density of trails than the Gilbert Trail does up in northern Minnesota, but they're still not reviewing it as an OHV area. Now, I've been told that we can do a citizen petition to ask for environmental review. We send this to the EQB, the Environmental Quality Board. We would have definitely enough documentation to show that they should do it. Then they send it to the responsible government unit, which is the DNR. And then the DNR decides if they want to do one, which I'm pretty clear they wouldn't do. So I don't feel like we should waste our time on that. But the one thing that we can request is if our city council requests environmental review, they have to do it. And I would think from our council's point of view, from covering their rear end point of view, they would probably want to have that done. But that's their decision. Nobody else can make the DNR do it. So going on a hunch, I thought, well, after the trail alignment was done, they should have had some staff review it. So I asked, was there another area team review of the trail alignment? And they said, yes. I said, great, can I get a copy of it? Because what they had said was the general statement from the DNR has been, there were no new concerns raised. Well, these are quotes, exact quotes from those 2019 comments. The one area where the ridges connect seem to maximize impacts with multiple proposed trails. The trail segment I mentioned in the attached document really seems to be high impact. I don't see how this segment could be built in a sustainable manner, or at least that does not significantly impact quality natural features like dry cliffs. It is what they said before, it just hasn't been addressed. The fragile soils in this area are not suitable or sustainable for these types of activities, in my opinion. The placement would maximize the potential for disturbing and degrading rattlesnake habitat, avoid putting trails on south-facing slopes. We should just be aware that it's going to negatively impact priority bird species. Spread of invasive species would negatively impact virtually all wildlife there. And then here's direct and to the point. Don't like the design, too many trails per acre, habitat loss for game and non-game species. So they're all saying the same thing. There aren't quotes that I'm ignoring where they're saying, yeah, this is a good idea, it's sustainable. Those aren't comments that are being submitted. And so their response to those comments was they changed nothing about the trail. Well, they reduced the rock crawl area. That was supposed to be 1.7 acres and now we're down to 0.8 acres. Otherwise, the trails are exactly the same. This trail map is leaving off. I had to verify with them. They accidentally deleted part of that trail and part of that trail, but they are actually still there. And we're supposed to be there. So their response to their own staff comments was, we're not changing anything, which seems a little bit concerning. And they wrote, I believe it's on the Save Our Bluffs resource page. And it's very interesting to read. The staff comments are all there. So you can read all the staff comments. What everybody said is on the Save Our Bluffs resources page, as well as the higher up response to it. And the higher up response included things like, this trail will give opportunities for positive experiences with venomous reptiles and give opportunities for rattlesnake education. I thought, wow, who's going to do that? But anyway, those were the official responses. You can read them. I'm not making this up. It's on our website. They're direct from the DNR. So I've been asked, why are we not having DNR resource staff speak tonight? And it's because they're not allowed to speak publicly about this project. Some of you who are at the April City Council meeting know that there was a DNR staff person that came and spoke to give the non-game wildlife perspective on it. And as we heard at another council meeting, that person was severely reprimanded for coming and speaking at the meeting and prohibited from basically having anything to do with this project at all, or speaking to anybody associated with this project. And not just him, but other staff have been told they cannot speak about this project at all. So that's why we don't have DNR resource staff speaking. And I asked if they would have resource staff meeting at the DNR open house on Tuesday, and the answer was no. So you don't get to talk to DNR resource staff about this. So that's why we brought in experts here. So that's the whole point of what we're doing, is bringing in people who are able to talk, and they are experts in the field, and they can give you their points of view. So the first person we're gonna have come up is Dr. Russ Smith. And let me find your PowerPoint here. I have too many things going on.
Can I unmask while I'm up?
Yep. Oh, nice. It's not going to let me minimize. Okay, bear with me for a moment.
Okay. Perfect.
It's recording, so it's not going to let me switch the share screen. Tech support. So his isn't open yet.
I'll just mention that
Is it down here at all?
No, it's not in the
alongside
chat.
Carla on and off while she's been working through this. And I would also say that the groups she has been working with have not been forthcoming in information.
Which one is
She's
this?
had to work really hard to get
It's
any
not
kind of
open.
response.
It has to be opened.
Oh.
And it won't let me open. Oh, there you go. So it's on the desktop.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it should be Russ.
Did it?
This one?
Yeah, it
Yep.
doesn't break down where your mouth.
I gotta turn it
Yeah, a
on.
little bit. There you go.
How's
Okay,
that?
you wanna stick that in your pocket?
Is that good? Okay.
Is that
Yeah.
in a Pocket somewhere. So. Move this a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yay for tech support. So you probably want to stand in front of the camera so
Oh,
people can see
okay.
you.
Can I push this out?
Only a little bit, you're tethered.
Oh, okay. Am I good? Anna? Okay. Excuse me. Yes, so I teach at Winona State University. I have taught classes in tourism and tourism research. I've done tourism research with students in a number of places, even New Zealand and Costa Rica. Notably, close by, several years back, we did several years worth of research in Lanesboro. So I teach other things, I've done other kinds of research, so haven't dedicated my professional career to tourism, but I feel very comfortable looking at tourism-related research and data and analysis. By the way, we call everything tourism when it comes to a town. When somebody out of town comes to town for whatever reason, it kind of falls under that rubric of tourism. So, you know, listening to Carla, the first thing that popped in my mind is why is this push? Why such a speedy set of activities to get this thing moving through? Am I good? And in short, money, right? So I've been looking into especially OHV tourism in the last couple of months, quite a bit. And the first thing you read anywhere is this incredible growth that's going on in OHV sales and travel and activity. They sold $15 billion worth of these machines in 2020. And the projected annual growth is 7%. ATV sales alone grew 3 times in between 1994 and 2006. What do I need to do?
I need to just get the cursor here. There, now it should go.
Am I using this or am I using the arrows?
You can use the arrows,
Okay.
or you can use this.
Oh, okay. So a lot of information on this. I'm not gonna drag you through every inch of it, but there's some research that says that $68 billion in economic activity can be traced back to OHV and OHV activities. Down the bottom, you see the Center of Business and Economic Research. It says that trail access and development for OHVs has grown slower than the rate of demand. So the idea is we just can't make these trails fast enough to accommodate all of these machines. If I have time later, I might talk a bit about where that great push comes from. But right now, in short, it comes from manufacturers like Polaris, who do an incredible amount of lobbying, millions of dollars worth of lobbying, as well as OHV clubs. So Carla talks about clubs, and just to clarify, an OHV club could be an ATV club or a motorcycle club or a 4-wheel club. And there are countless clubs across the country, a good number of clubs in the state of Minnesota, in addition to associations, professional associations, manufacturers associations, and all of these groups are in on the big OHV push. Here are some few, just a sampling of news articles that are resist this push, but really they they do not stand up well against the OHV lobby. So here's some of the research that has gotten state of Minnesota's attention, and accordingly has resulted in the push down through DNR and other government agencies to get these trails built. There's a study that says in Colorado, there's OHV trails are responsible for an addition of $2.3 billion in revenue, not counting labor. Idaho claims there's 1 million OHV excursions a year in their state. Montana claims 2.3 million people are employed. Iowa did a study that said $28 million is headed out of state because we don't have enough OHV trails. That's the fear of state legislatures, that those dollars head out of state. Missouri claims that OHVers are spending $100 a day and so on. Well, these studies were posted by the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council. In other words, an association that is an advocate for OHV. Now, that doesn't make the research wrong or doesn't mean they're lying, but it means it is sponsored research. What that means is an individual OHV club or an association, they pay some one person to do the research to demonstrate how much economic activity there is. So I want to look at this a little bit more carefully. And I want to talk about, at the risk of putting you guys to sleep, just for a moment, peer-reviewed research. So professionals here know what peer-reviewed research is. It means it's research. If I do research, I have, and I've published research. If I do that research, then I have to send it to experts in the field. And those experts look at that and they critique it, they evaluate it, they criticize it, they send it back to me, they make suggestions. I have to redo it. I have to go get a different sample, I send it to them again, and eventually they'll give me a thumbs up and it gets published. That's what peer-reviewed research is. So here is a site, it's a Google sponsored site that is a database of peer-reviewed research. Okay, and I searched on negative impact of off-road vehicle tourism. And I got back 95,000 hits on this research. Now, I'm not simply saying this is such a bad idea. 95,000 people are talking about, 95,000 professionals are talking about this being a bad idea. The point I'm making here is that it is a serious thing. I don't think I didn't realize that the average citizen realizes just how disruptive, just how big of an impact OHV recreation has on communities, on the environment, on wildlife, on water and streams, and so on and so on and so on. It's a big deal, okay? So, and all of these don't apply to Houston. There's one that talks about the sand dunes in Idaho. We don't have sand dunes here. But again, the point is that OHV recreation is something that a lot of people, a lot of professionals, biologists, geologists, botanists, are very, very, very concerned about. So I pulled one article from, it was conducted by the US Department of Labor and a geological survey funded by the US Bureau of Land Management. This one piece of research pulled together 700 other pieces of research, all right? And it was obviously a very long and detailed analysis of OHV, but in effect, they said at the end, here's what you have to be careful for. You have to be careful for soil and watersheds. There's a lot of potential damage there. Vegetation, wildlife and wildlife habitat, water quality, air quality, and the socioeconomic impact, right? And then they also mentioned a number of things that would be of concern here. They said having a lot of trails on a very small piece of land is especially problematic. And in the write-up and the description of this trail system, they acknowledged that. They said that this is a lot of trails on a small piece of land. So the point is that their recommendation was when you install an OHV trail, it has to be very carefully designed. It has to be, the impacts have to be assessed, and then it has to be managed. And the more difficult it is, the more tedious, the more detailed, the more issues, the more it has to be managed. And so they have developed very detailed procedures to guide this process. That's what Carl has been talking about. And at best, these procedures were followed very carelessly. All right, that being said, I'm not going to talk about the money. And I want to go back to those studies that just, were just fantastic in how much money we're going to make. Let me just look at that Colorado study. The Colorado study said they're going to add 2.3 billion to the economy. And in that study, they included the vehicles, the cost of the vehicles themselves, the clothing that you buy, the trailers, the magazines, the repairs, the storage sheds that you have to put them in, the food, the gas, membership fees, magazines. They left out nothing, right, in the Colorado study. And then they also added in the sales tax, the employment, the state income tax, and they used a multiplier. And I know you probably on a Sunday night hate hearing about this, but just stick with me for a second. A multiplier is in a state, let's say we have a state here, and somebody spends $100, and they maybe buy a farmer sells some vegetables at the market for $100. That farmer then spends the money someplace else. That money then is spent again, and that money spent again. So that $100 adds up to more than $100. It's the same $100, but it's adding up to something more than $100. And so that's what you call a multiplier. It's the ripple effect of economic activity. And that ripple effect results in state income tax and sales tax. So you add all of that up together and you get the $2.3 billion of Colorado that was added to the Colorado economy. That doesn't work. That works for Minnesota as a state, but that doesn't really have anything to do with a single local location. Houston doesn't collect state income tax. We don't collect sales tax. True enough, we get benefit from that. The state is giving us benefits from those taxes, but those dollars don't come directly here. So we push aside state research on the economic benefit of this type of activity. That brings us to regional tourism. So a good example of regional tourism, a region is just that, a region within a state. A very popular one, well-known one is the Hatfield-McCoy OHV trail system in West Virginia, mostly in West Virginia. This is a system that has 700 miles of trail with plans to expand it to 2,000 miles of trail. It is actually 8 separate trail systems that are interconnected that cross 9 counties. In 2014, they had 36,000 visitors in this area, right? 36,000 visitors in 2014. We had the Houston County Fair. When was that? How long ago was that? 2 weeks ago?
You're thinking hoedown.
What's that? Hoedown, I'm sorry, the hoedown, right. And Steve, I saw Steve back there, the hoedown, how long ago was that? 2 weeks ago, something like that. Yeah. Let's talk to a club representative that offered that Houston would get 100 to 200,000 visitors with our trail here. And this trail system got 36,000 visitors. Did I see, did you have a, what's that? Yes, it is. That say it again, I didn't quite hear you.
The Hatfield-McCoy OHV trail system started as a hiking. Hatfield McCoy OHV trail system started as a hiking and horseback riding and other recreational use trail system. And they turned it into OHV trails because people who lived in the community wanted it. And it actually brought revenue to the community.
Yes, it does. So let me, and we can talk more about that when I'm finished here. That's fine. But there is, to say that we're going to get 100,000 visitors here is just a ridiculous number. I mean, at best. We have a 7-mile trail. They had a 700-mile trail. Also, in West Virginia, their unemployment was one of the highest in the nation. They were impoverished in the Appalachian area. And they have a lot of mines that had really destroyed land. And so they made that conversion and they've made a lot of money. I'll talk about that more in a minute. So what do OHV users want? There's a lot of research on what they want in a destination, what attracts them. First and foremost, more trails, longer trails, challenging and better designed trails, and internet connected trails. So on the Hatfield-McCoy system, they've got these 8 different trails, and they like for those trails to be interconnected so they can go from one to the other. There's a lot of advantages to this kind of a system for an OHV user. They don't like the place they're in. They don't like the people that they're around. They can easily move over. If it's overcrowded, they can easily go to a different area. So again, this is 700 miles, a trail system. Houston has 7 plus. So if here are all of the trails in Minnesota plotted out in terms of how miles long they are. And Houston, you can see where Houston is. Comparatively, we have a really tiny, a 7-mile trail is very, very tiny. The average trail length in Minnesota is 36 miles. So what do OHV users want in a trail system? The second thing are what they call friendly communities. Now understand, I am bringing peer-reviewed research to the table. This isn't one person talking. This isn't my opinion. Right? This is validated research that's been through the mill. Friendly communities. What that means, more than anything, it means a lot of things, but one of the first things it means is that the vehicles are welcome in town. There's legal issues there that you have to get around, and discussion and ordinances. But in short, OHV users want to drive into town. And they need to drive into town if they're going to eat lunch or do something like that. They do not want to lock and load their truck and their trailer or unlock and load it and drive their truck into town and then back. They want to be on the ATVs and come into town. And one of the characteristics of a friendly town is a town that lets them to do that. Not only lets them, but embraces that. Parking lots, food, readily available to and catering to OHV users. These pictures are all from the Hatfield-McCoy trail system. So this is a town that embraces OHV. There's a lot of discussion that they're going to stay at the hotel. They're not going to stay at the hotel. A day rider is not going to come in and go into the hotel or use paid lodging. At best, they're going to camp. And so you need to have campground facilities. If they're going to be there for a longer period of time, you can accommodate them with lodging. The town celebrates. The town celebrates. They have festivals. They have OHV Day, right, where they have parades and so on and so forth. This is what's required to embrace OHV users. What comes with that are a number of other responsibilities that have been, again, undertaken competently in the Hatfield-McCoy system. Now, I'm not showing you this stuff to say, oh, it's bad, they crash all the time. They do crash though. They do have accidents. There has to be emergency services. You have to clean up the trash. You have to check out the campgrounds. These are things that communities do for OHV tourism. It's part of the cost, it's part of the expense, it's part of something you do. These communities do that happily because they're bringing in the revenue from that. Community support, there's a lot of research on local tourism. How do you embrace local tourism? It requires community leadership, business support, and the community as a whole. There are researchers who have offered that the single most problematic issue that prevents successful tourism is lack of community support. There are those who would say that a community that does not support local tourism, it is almost a sure bet that the tourism is going to fail. What else do they want? Limited rules and regulations. Again, there's peer-reviewed research that demonstrates that OHV and ATV riders resist and resent rules and regulations more than the average tourist. This doesn't mean they're all bad and they're all doing bad stuff. It doesn't mean they're just reject all the rules, but there's ample research that they do that more than most. So what are the rules and regulations? Well, these are the rules and regulations. And when do you see these? When the trail system has all kinds of problems. When it's steep, as Carla just described. When there's wildlife issues. When there's a sandy soil. All of these problems that Carla has been describing requires extra management. And the management are the rules and the regulations and the signs. And this group of tourists, if you will, do not embrace those rules very well. Sensitive environmental areas require a lot of management. So the Hatfield-McCoy trails, they did research, this is fairly recent research, $626 per visit. And you can see these visits are 2 or 3 or 4 days long. In tourism, for local tourism, people staying overnight is the holy grail. Someone that stays overnight, they're buying 3 meals instead of 1. They're visiting the grocery store for extra snacks. They walk around town to browse and window shop. Keeping people overnight is a big deal. We discovered that in Lanesboro, that the tourists who stay overnight, they stay in a bed and breakfast in Lanesboro, spend way more money, right? So you have to keep these people overnight. That works out to $150 to $175 a day. Okay, so in Minnesota, we could say that the regional tourism for Minnesota is up in northern Minnesota, northeastern Minnesota, up in the Iron Range and up in those areas. A lot of trails up there, right? And the idea, and here's where the wheels come off the wagon. There is the idea that what we can do is add up all of the money that they spend in this region. And there's a little bit of a multiplier up there. So people in this region, there's a local grocery store and the employee gets money and they go down the road and they spend that money someplace else. And so that money multiplies a little bit in a region. So what's done typically in these studies that persuade small towns to embrace OHV trails is they take the average expenditures in a region like this and they take it down to a local place like Houston, right? Well, you can't do that. Apples and oranges. You can't take that average and pull it down into a local area. There are differences. The multipliers are different. The different things that they're spending money on and how much money they spend. So again, more research. How much do people spend? in a local area. Well, Florida State did a really great study, and it ranges, they estimated that a daily spend from a OHV visit is anywhere from $25 to $130. They were using 20 or 25-mile trails in doing this study. And the $25 to $130 range depends on how much stuff you have in town to collect the money. If you don't have something in town to collect the money, to absorb that money, then people aren't going to spend that money, right? So at 35% spent on gas, they fill up once before they come, and they maybe fill up again before they leave. So you get half of that spent in the town. Restaurant, bar, maybe. Groceries, about half of that. Again, most of it, they do buy groceries to come and go camp. They don't necessarily buy it here. At best, they buy half of it here, depending on what kind of a facility you have. Retail, a clothing store, we don't have one. Entertainment, we don't have anything. So if you multiply all of that out, I came up with, and there is other research that comes up with the same numbers, about 30 or 40 bucks is what they're going to spend in Houston at best. At the very most, that's how much money is going to be spent in Houston. And I think, honestly, that I'm being really generous with that number. You also have to remember, Houston could have the tourism framework to really develop a tourist segment. We don't, we should. But as it is, they spend that money in town, they spend it at a gas station, let's say. That gas station sends most of that money out of town to pay the gas bill, right? So they're paying a little bit to an employee. There's a little bit that sticks around out of that $30 or $40, not much. This research and others have said 20 or 25-mile trail is entry level. If you don't have a 20 or 25-mile trail, people aren't going to make the trip. What you have is about, again, research, an hour. People are willing to, for a small trail, they're willing to drive an hour. Now, of course, there's exceptions, and I'm sure you can tell me about somebody that pulls a ATV from who knows whereville to this wonderful little trail that has an outlook over the river, and they hold hands and you know, kiss and whatever. Okay, that happens, I'm sure. On average, it doesn't happen, right? We're going to collect people within an hour, maybe, okay? Our trail is 7 miles though. It's a 7-mile trail. It's not a 20 or 25-mile trail. So, what's that?
10 minutes to go around the whole trail.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it doesn't take long, but here's what's going to happen. Okay, I kind of step out of the professor role here for a minute. This is a little bit difficult as a professor. I am supposed to present objective research, and I do. All right, so this is legitimate stuff. I challenge anybody to, you have a disagreement, bring your research, bring your data. Let's sit down and take a look at it. All right. But a 7-mile trail with people going around it really fast, here's what's going to happen. The OHV clubs are going to say, there's a new trail in Houston, go visit it because we need to make them feel good about their new trail. That will happen for a season. All right. And there's going to be revenue generation from initial construction and excavation. That's going to create some economic activity here. All right. And that's it, in my personal opinion. Now I'm back being a professor. So 7 miles. So I talked to the crowd here about, from the very beginning, this bothered me. I kept thinking, wow, why is this big push to put in this 7-mile trail? Even without doing the research, I knew that at best it was going to bring in 25, 30, 35 bucks per person. And I also know that because I just did some research for the OWL Center, and I just did some research for baristas. And basically what happens for a visitor that comes into Houston, they visit the L Center or they do the trailhead walk. They stop and get a sandwich or a cup of coffee at baristas. They may or may not fill up with gas and they leave. I've done one major survey and 3 minor surveys in Houston. I know what happens here. I know how the tourists act, right? So at best, we're going to get somebody that comes in and maybe buys a sandwich and maybe fills up with gas and leaves. So I was talking to Carla and a few others about this, and Carla being Carla did some additional research. Lo and behold, there's a provision in the grant to buy more land and extend the trail. So somebody honestly had their heads up and knew that a 7-mile trail isn't going to do much. And so they're preparing to extend the size of the trail up to about 20 miles. And yeah, that would bring more people in. So Minnesota is definitely behind the push on this. This is Minnesota promotional material. We have some ATVers there. Interestingly, they're off trail, which is illegal. And we have a sandhill crane there. I'm pretty sure there aren't going to be sandhill cranes in the vicinity here. So, well, before I leave that, in short, the revenue possibilities for Houston, based on this size of trail, are pretty limited. I'm missing some of my PowerPoint. How did that vanish on me? Oh, I didn't. Okay, we're good. I'm sorry. So, can this trail be profitable? Yeah, you want to make it bigger. You want to embrace ATVs in town. You want to accommodate them being in town. You want to develop the kinds of businesses that they want and they need. I mean, yeah, you can make it profitable. So what I was just about going to say when I got lost here, hang on just a minute. Finally, trail conflict. There is a lot of conflict between ATV users and other travelers, trail users. Again, research on this, a lot of research. People do not want to be around ATVs. So many of the ATV trails in this state are exclusively ATV or OHV trails, but a number are also multi-use trails, but they're not really multi-use trails, I would argue. I ride horses. Horses, I promise you, don't want to be around ATV. A lot of research about hikers don't want to be around ATVs. A lot of ATV people don't want to be around a lot of ATVs. They like to spread out and not be near one another. So there's some pictures of that. So finally, let me end on this. And this is where I really step out of my role, and I just really have to kind of just speak from the gut here. Houston has tourism right now. You have nature-based or eco-tourists. They're in town. You've got a trailhead. You've got the Root River and kayaking or canoeing available. You have an internationally known owl center. These people are already here. And nature tourists of this sort, they spend more money, they have more money, and they are more dedicated to local economies. If you give them a choice between McDonald's and a small coffee shop, they're going to go to the small coffee shop and pay twice as much if that's necessary. They will actively refuse to engage more mass tourists kinds of business. So the money they spend tends to stick longer than other types of tourism. I took these pictures at baristas day before yesterday. The couple on the left, I had a picture of a little frog, and on my phone, my wife sent me because she was afraid of it. And so these people just happened to walk in, and I happened to have that on my phone. And I got to talking to the lady on the left, and she's like an expert on this stuff, right? I mean, she knew what kind of a frog it was and how big it was going to get, and she described it to me, and so on and so forth. These guys on the right had heard about this event tonight. I didn't even know them, and they said, good luck on that event, right? So these are the people we already have here. They have more money, they're more willing to spend it, and they're very environmentally sensitive. Instead of leaving trash behind, they picked up other people's trash, okay? I think that's it. I think that's all I have. We're good, right?
Okay. Next up is Dan. Okay. Probably.
Shit.
Got it? There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. What are you gonna introduce me?
So our next speaker is Dr. Dan Kyler, retired clinical toxicologist from Hennepin County Medical Center, specializing in venomous snake bites and other venomous stuff, but mostly snake bites is what I know you for anyway.
All things venomous.
Yeah, like around the world kind of stuff. And he's also a rattlesnake researcher and has done rattlesnake research here in Southeast Minnesota. And you just came back from the Chiricahuas, and he's doing rattlesnake research and other snake research all over. So Dan, let's have your take on things.
Thank you. I'm not here to make you like rattlesnakes. They're fascinating creatures, you know, they're not huggable. But what I'd like to share with you is what I've learned over 40 years of working with timber rattlesnakes in particular, and over 30 years of those in the upper Mississippi River Valley, why they're vulnerable and why it's really becoming extremely important to protect their habitat. There just isn't much left. So I'm going to walk you through some biology, a little bit of history, and where things currently are and the concerns. If you look at nationally, this map up here, follow the river up to Minnesota and Wisconsin. If you look at these large pink area, this outline here, that was the original range of the timber rattlesnake. It was the first species of rattlesnake reported in the United States when the Europeans came over. And what you see now, the dark pink area and these yellow areas, it's broken up. Their habitats become fragmented due to civilization and a lot of impact from highways and things that have disrupted the gene flow. And the reason this one is yellow versus the pink is they call it the canebrake rattlesnake. It's the same species. It's basically a species that lives in a lower habitat instead of the higher blufflands or the mountain habitat. But they were widespread originally, and things have changed drastically. Yeah, you what?
I didn't get the screen share back on. That's why we need our good tech person here.
I'm not the tech person, not responsible.
Yeah, it's not Dan's fault. Okay. Now we get this back to playing again. Come on. Try to get it. There we go. And then we hide that puppy. Okay, there. Thanks, Anna.
So this is a Minnesota rattlesnake. This is actually from Houston County. And some of the common names: banded rattlesnake, bluff rattler, Velvet tail, I think you can see why it's called banded. You can see why it's called a velvet tail, because the lower third of the body sometimes is just like pure velvet. They live in the bluffs, and Sintada is the Sioux Indian name for the rattlesnake, which translates to yellow rattlesnake. And you can see that this does have that yellow color. And let's see here. Why are we not advancing?
You gotta click on there
Oh,
somewhere.
you can, you don't.
Well,
use
no,
it.
I just gotta do it the first time. Now you can do it. Here you go.
All right, I think we're set finally. A little bit of history. Timber rattlesnake was first described in 1680 by Father Hennepin when he came up on his voyages up the Mississippi River. And they called them serpent sonnets. And a little bit later, LeSueur reported rattlesnakes in the caverns along Lake Pepin. We get to 1814 in Anderson in Wisconsin, the riverbanks killed many rattlesnakes. In 1867, massive killings in southeastern Minnesota. You look at some of the newspaper accounts and they would kill, in some of the sites here that maybe only have 40 snakes left today, they would kill 200 or 300 in a day. And in the 1900s, because of the concern for protecting the public, there was a bounty implemented to have rattlesnakes killed, because obviously they can take human life. And the number of lives taken by timber rattlesnakes historically in the state is not that great. It has happened, but the numbers aren't that great. What you get a lot of is a lot of exaggeration. And you can ask me questions later about the actual number of bites, but just to put it in perspective, we haven't had a fatality in Minnesota since the 1800s. When you look at the bounty, and this is just from Houston County, starting in 1939 up through 1987, the number of bounties of snakes killed and turned in. They would turn in the head and the rattle. You could turn it into the township level and the county level, and you get a fee for turning those in. What was interesting, people would also run across the river and turn in a bounty there and then come back here and get bounty from both states, take the heads and rattles back and forth. But you can see, look at 1941, 6,000 rattlesnakes were killed. And then by the time we got to 1987, there was only 179 bounties in Houston County. Now, part of that is probably fewer people were actually out killing the snakes. One of the interesting things I learned is during the Depression, there were people in Houston County that would actually go out and kill the snakes because they could turn in the bounties, and they made more money doing that than they did any other source. So there's an economic factor to this in terms of survival, but we are way past that now. The bottom line is the number of rattlesnakes went way down. So myself and a couple other people spoke to the legislature in 1989 based on some of our research and said, you know, you need to maybe remove this economic incentive. The snakes are just not here in the large numbers based on our field work. Those sites where I tell you they thought we'd see maybe 100 or 200 snakes, you might have a den with a capacity of 40 or 50 snakes at the most. So the bounty was dropped in 1989, and in 1975 it was in Wisconsin. They were ahead of us. And in July of 1996, it became a threatened species, so they became protected. And protected from the sense that, like, if you're in jeopardy or your children or your pet is in danger, then you obviously could take the snake's life. But otherwise, they were protected. One of the things we learned from our field research is the sex ratio between male and female rattlesnakes. If you look at the rest of the country, it was anywhere from like 5 to 7 females per male. And in Minnesota, this is several years of data, the ratio was approximately unity, one male to 1 female. Why? Females were selectively killed by bounty hunters. They would learn when the snakes were pregnant. They would kill the female, cut her head off, cut her open, take out all the babies, and turn in and harvest each one of the babies. So you might get a bounty on 9 or 10 snakes instead of 1 snake. So because the females were selectively taken, this is a slow process for them to come back. We know that roads, agriculture, and cities have all impacted the rattlesnakes. This, you know, compared to historical, the way the land was here, just a lot more highways, a lot more dissecting roads, and consequently, a lot more encounters with humans with rattlesnakes, and the snakes pretty much pay the price more than anyone. So we look at habitat in Minnesota. Yeah, they're in bluffland areas, follow the river, but they do run inland along the Root River, some of the other river corridors up in Wabasha. This is kind of the habitat, this green area, but that's a little misleading. That's just an outline. I threw these dots in. These aren't exactly den sites, but what's happened because of agriculture, because of roads, their habitats become even more fragmented than it used to be. Consequently, they can't reproduce to the same capacity they used to. You have to have genetic transfer between these sites up and down the river corridor if you want long-term survival of the species. So yeah, they might be around for 25, maybe 50 years, but they will die out if you don't have that diversity in their genetic makeup. So you can see they went up to actually above the Cannon River. There's hardly anything left around the Cannon River anymore. There's just a remnant population of adult snakes. In the spring, they come out in early May, sometimes in late April, depending on our weather, sometimes later. Here's 3 males that came out. We took this picture in early May, went back a month later, somebody taken a crowbar, ripped the rocks out, destroyed the whole den site, and we've never seen a snake there since. We found rattles, so we knew they'd been killed, and the rattles were just left for some reason. They will use in the summer, they'll forage, they get curious. And what you have to think about is what you've got with this proposed trail systems. They have transient habitat. They don't just sit at the dens. They'll go into the forest, far from the den, and they're ambush predators. So they'll lay next to logs and wait for chipmunks to run across. They'll even climb, this is 12 foot up in a tree. And they'll wait for squirrels and things to run up and down the tree. These things are not where the den is. They go out into the forest for their food to forage. To mate, the males do a combat dance. People think this is a male and a female, but it's 2 males. Usually there's a female maybe 15 to 20 feet away, and the males will fight to determine which one has access to the female. And it's really pretty interesting to see. It's like I don't understand how they can work in perfect parallel motion, but they do. And they'll keep going back and forth, knocking each other over till one finally wears out. The other one ends up with a wife. So, what's interesting though is people don't realize for a rattlesnake when it's born, it takes 5 to 8 years to reach sexual maturity. So the female rattlesnake, by the time she's born, will be at least a minimum of 5 years old and up to 8 years old before they reproduce for the first time. And they only have a litter once every 3 to 4 years. And a litter size is an average maybe of 7. So they're not like deer and things and birds that reproduce at a higher rate. There's a low recruitment into a population, which again makes them very vulnerable. So losing their habitat, low reproduction makes them very, very susceptible to disappearing. They will mate in July and August. They'll gestate. In other words, they have basking areas where they got to thermoregulate to make the embryos develop. And they'll sit in sunny areas, whether it's inside of logs or sometimes up on rocks. There's basking areas. And sometimes they're not where you think they'd be. They're not always right on the bluffs. And so they'll sit there and they'll gestate, and then the young are born in late August, early September. And again, they'll have maybe the average number of newborns in Minnesota, based on our years of research, is about 7. So they really have a stressful demand to survive in this environment. Fall ingress mid-September. They're 7+ months of the year underground. And if they don't get far enough underground, they don't live. A lot of the newborns, there's probably about a 60% fatality rate. So out of those 7 in that litter, you only got 2 or 3 that are going to make it past 1 year. Well, the conflict with humans. Unfortunately, snakes just get a bad rap. They're not like puppies. They're not like deer. They're not like bear. They're not like moose, something that's really glamorous. but they're very unique. But people will seek out ways to destroy them. Here's was a den rock, and someone had taken a huge log and ripped it out of the hill. So they face that type of a problem. Habitat loss. This is Diamond Bluff proposal in Wisconsin. Put a golf course in right where there's prime timber rattlesnake habitat. Once you do that, yeah, you'll have snakes on the golf course for a while. I've actually had patients who were bitten on the golf course. But the bottom line is, once that's there, you've altered that habitat, and the snakes after maybe 20, 25 years are no longer going to be there. So here's your trail system. And you look at these ridges, and you can see some of those knobs there and things. They always say, you know, the Department of Natural Resources is important to protect southwest, west, and southwest facing slopes, because those are the thermoregulatory areas. They get the sun the longest period of time. It keeps them warm, and it gives the greatest survivorship. But the reality is the snakes, they do that for hibernation, but they don't stay there all summer. There are some that'll stay close to the den sites, but a large majority of them are going to work through the forest, like I said, and search for food, search for a mate, and sometimes just to go to another site where they may hibernate the next fall. So if you look at these trails, they're all pretty close, and so snakes are going to move. The reality is snakes are going to move back and forth through there. If you look at some of this, here's like an outcrop here that goes over a knoll. You get to the other side. Here's like, not all dens are in big outcrops. Here's a little ledge with a pocket under it. And sometimes they'll den up even in a hole in the hill where there's not even a rock, but there's rock structure back in that you can't see. And this is from the trail area. Another one, here's a large piece of talus, a slope down below, scattered light. Snakes sometimes will hunt in those areas and they'll stay there coiled up just waiting for things. So they use this habitat. Look at ledges where these crevices are. They'll lay in there. They'll come down to these rock areas and these things here. Sometimes this can be a basking area if the sun hits it. These are called rookery rocks with females. And also, again, large ledges that they can hide in. One of the biggest things they do is thermal regulate on the hills, how they keep their body temperature just right. Rattlesnakes just can't lay in the sun all day or they'll die. So what they'll typically do is lay in one of those ledges, and they'll have a loop out in the sun and the other loop back in the shadow. And that way they're cooling and warming at the same time. And if it gets too hot, they just obviously go way back under. So these are features that are part of where the trail system is. And so even if you put the trail around these things, the reality is the snakes will be moving across the trails and all through this habitat, and they run the risk of really getting run over. Not maybe people deliberately running over them, but when you're going, you know, you're focusing on the terrain. You're thinking about not rolling your vehicle or something. So snakes would actually probably be killed inadvertently. And that's something you want to avoid, obviously. One of the things I wanted to point out, just kind of in closing here, is if you look at the genetics of the timber rattlesnake, I don't expect you all to understand this, but the maternal genetics, haplotype for them, there's about 21 different haplotypes in the United States. Minnesota, if you look up there where that U is, it's the only place in the country that's been represented. So there's something really different about the gene here in the upper Mississippi River Valley. It's not been found in other parts of the country. So it's kind of a unique feature biologically and genetically. How that translates into long-term survival, I can't tell you. But it's the only time and the only place it's been reported. So I hope that that everyone kind of considers that this snake and this species doesn't have a lot of space in Minnesota. Yes, I'm sure a lot of you know where there are timber rattlesnakes in Minnesota, and then especially in Houston County and Winona County. Of course there are, but there aren't large numbers. The fears from snake bite are way exaggerated. Like I said, in the United States, there's only 4 or 5 fatalities per year from snake bite. And those are Western Diamondbacks for the most part. So it's something that you don't want to take for granted, but you don't want to be overly paranoid about. So anyway, I just hope that the snake will be part of something that's considered in its long-term survival. And this happens to be a prime piece of habitat that's left right here in association with the town of Houston, which is kind of unique, actually. Thank you. Oh. Like when I'm fishing.
Can you put that on?
Okay.
And then I'm gonna stick it in the pocket, and then I'm gonna close out of this. Okay. And you're just gonna be on screen here. So just kind of stand in front where they can see you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Some of you may know me. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ron Miners, and I've got a lot of experience in the conservation field. I've worked in Houston County all my life. I've been a resident of Houston County all my life. And I worked 25 years with the River Soil and Water District. So you've probably seen me around some of the time. And now I'm doing private consulting work with the Department of Ag, working in Mower County, Fillmore County, and still some in Houston County. But getting back to my conservation history, I spent a lot of time first as a technician, designing and implementing conservation practices in this county. I moved on from there to soil conservationist, working with vegetation establishment and putting conservation plans together for landowners. And then as a manager at the end of my career. And so I feel that what I bring today is not just my experience, but good recommendations for this proposed site. And what we're looking at here is a fragile site. The soils are so sensitive. They're sandy loam soils on that site. And the proposed trail system that we're talking about is condensed. It's tight. During my career, we helped landowners put in driveways, and we couldn't even exceed, as a soil and water district, we didn't want to exceed 10% grade. And 12% was allowable, but we hated to see them win. And when we were designing driveways on slopes such as these, it's almost impossible to get those things in there. The contractors that we worked with, that I worked with, did a half cut, half fill. So when you're taking a dozer blade and you're working that trail system, they're cutting half, filling half, kind of taking it over the edge, et cetera. And that's how they build the trails here and the roads. It looked like when I was looking at the Trails Unlimited, they may have been using different machines in there. But still, what they're not really addressing too much is the cut bank and the fill bank. They talk about the stability of those trails, about hardening them, putting in water breaks, doing all that stuff. That's fine. But you've still got the cut slope and the fill slope. So no matter how they build them, when you're working in an area like this on that proposed trail system with slopes that 30 to 70% slopes, steep. When you're working with that kind of slope, at best, if you disturb 20 feet, 25 feet, 30 feet on that hillside, trying to get that trail in there, trying to do something in there, you take that times 7.5 miles and you're ending up with 20, 25 acres of open area. If they can keep it at that, And that's probably minimum. And that's a lot of open land in that little bit of area to try to stabilize. When we built driveways and did a lot of our conservation practices, we tried to get 2-to-1 side slopes. So for every 2 feet coming out vertical, you go up 1 foot. And so in these cases, once you exceed 50% slope, these land slopes, you can't get it anymore. A 2-to-1 is invisible. It has to be less than 50% land slope to be able to get that to come out at a 2-to-1. So at very best, they might be able to get a 1-to-1 on those trails. And if they do that, it's going to take some kind of anchoring material, some kind of mulching material, some kind of stabilization on that critical area to try and get some vegetation established. And everything has to go right. It has to be just a perfect scenario to get some kind of grass or some kind of vegetation that's going to hold something in there. The thing that bothers me the most, I think, on hillsides like that, when you're talking about trails, is you're changing the overland flow. When you've got a hillside, you've got water coming down sheet run. When it rains hard, it comes down that hillside. That hillside has taken a long time to get into the shape it's in, much less when you come and start cutting. Now you're changing the topography. You're cutting a trail. You're changing that overland flow. It's going to get to this trail, or you're going to change the direction of that water. And now it has to go into more concentrated flow areas. And Trails Unlimited talks about energy dissipators, catch basins, different things like that. Sure, you can put things in like that. You end up with some of these significant rainfall events that we've seen lately. And I was here in 2007, and I spent a lot of time down here around Houston in 2007. You saw major hillsides slough, and all the residents were asking, why? How could that possibly have happened? You know, that you would, down by Brownsville, a house slides off the hill, or any of the roads around here. A lot of them were closed because of mudslides and debris on the road. And you start carving into those hillsides, or in that case, it could have been a den hole, it could have been a cow path, it could have been anything upstream that started that movement of that water down that hill to loosen everything up and cause that kind of problem in the area. So that's one of my concerns, is the overland flow change. And I didn't see that addressed very much in their plans when they were trying to talk about their trail construction. And much less the fact of finding a vegetation that would take those kinds of velocities they're talking about. And even after they leave the rock areas or the basins, it's not even 2007. There were other years when we had 4-inch rains, 6-inch rains, things like that. I've seen pipes blow out of ponds. I've seen terraces run over. I've seen it all. And Mother Nature can be pretty cruel. You know, you've got a short memory if you don't remember what happened in 2007, because it was absolutely devastating. You take an area like this, you open that up with that many trails, and you get a significant rainfall event, and there's going to be havoc in there. And sure, you can come in with the big equipment again, patch it all up, throw a bunch of money at it, fix it all up, and then it may happen again. It may happen again the next week. So that's you know, my major concerns in there. The maintenance, the repair work, the monitoring, some of the other fellows talked about it a little bit. I'm involved with a club close to Eitzen that has started some of these ATV trail rides on private land for one-time use. They come through, we've had as many as 300, 350 of those trail riders come through the land. We go through 28 or 29, 30 landowners, and they are gracious enough to let us come through for a short ride, a 2-hour duration ride or a 3-hour duration ride. And even then, we talk to them a lot and they say they're concerned about the abuse to their trail. And they remind us that if things start going backwards, they'd have to cut it off. You know, it just wouldn't work out. But, so I've been around this stuff all my life. You've got issues with sediment delivery into the rivers, water quality, wildlife habitat loss. Some of this wildlife won't put up with changes like that. In my mind, I really don't feel that the reward they're looking for is worth the risk. It's a tight little area. I'm not saying some of them trails couldn't be developed on certain slopes around the country. out in another direction or outside of town, if you're on 15% slopes or 20% slopes or level areas or something like that, that's one thing. But to carve into these bluffs, I'm not a fan of it. Never have been. I've got myself in more than one hot water time when I've had to turn down a driveway application for landowners. I said, you're going to hate that thing your entire life. You're going to be fighting that driveway. And so most of the time,
I have a really steep driveway. You're right. It's just a part-time job.
yeah. So I'm really not here tonight to say that against it or for it or whatever. I just want you to know that this is a risky endeavor going into that site that you're talking about, putting those trails in. And so that's about all I got, Carl.
So whoops, we gotta get that out of the box. I'm gonna run away like Dan. Okay, do we have some questions here on site first? And then we'll go to YouTube. Yes. You know what? Yep. You wanna come up here? And then for a specific person, because we'll put the person over here with the mic.
So this question's for Dr. Russ.
Okay, Russ, you want to come up here with the mic?
My name is Jeff O'Brien. I'm a Lakeville, Minnesota resident. I've been working on this trail system since 2009.
You've been working on this trail system?
Correct, sir.
Okay.
You can just hold it if you want, Russ.
Oh, okay. I'm good. Sure.
So, first question I have for you is, you said that this is a speedy project. So it's been being developed for 12, 15 years. That sounds speedy.
It was started 12 or 15 years ago. It lay dormant for quite some time, and more recently than the procedures that have happened, I would describe as speedy. In not only in terms of time, but in the sense of Carla's inquiries into where's the document, where's this, where's that, can we find out this? The response she's gotten back from DNR has been very muted, which has made it feel even more speedy. So, I might have, I think I did say that, but I was talking about just from the Minnesota state government top down, there's a big push to get these trails installed very, very quickly. There are right now in Minnesota, by my calculation, there are 3,200 miles of trails laid end to end that would reach from Maine to California and back to Utah. And on the griddle, there's another 300 miles of, there's 300 miles of GIA trails, in addition to lobby trail extensions. So if you look at the overall trail development over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's been pretty overwhelming.
Can you tell me how many miles of truck trail are in the state of Minnesota? Truck to Jeeps?
No,
It's less than 3.
it's less than what?
3 miles of trails dedicated that will be used in the state of Minnesota.
No, you're talking about,
Grant Day Trail.
you're losing me a little bit. You're talking about like 4-wheel Jeeps.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So there's 3 miles of trail dedicated for using Jeeps in the state of Minnesota.
And this would be sort of rare in that it offers that opportunity. Is that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So how many trail systems are in southeast Minnesota? Tell me that.
There's one in Chatfield that's, could be extended. There's one in, Trout Valley that is fairly short. I think it's 10 miles or 12 miles or something like that. Certainly those are going to collect Winona Trail people before this one would. There is a dearth of trails, kind of in a westerly direction. And the reason for that is because I'm sure you know, OHV trail folk, they like hills and they like dips and valleys. And anybody that lives in Minnesota knows that if you head west out of here in 10 miles, it's flat. So bluff country is a prime target. And your club and the application process specifically said, we want to develop trails in southeast Minnesota, specifically targeting the bluffs. So you're right, there's not many around here. And that would make this 7-mile trail a little more attractive. But as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the Jeeps, the 4-wheelers, the full-size vehicle trucks, they are the most destructive of all of the trails. Am I right about that?
That's not true.
That's not true.
I'd like to see a study that says that. So if you're
Well,
research.
I think you have to have a pretty wide trail as opposed to a motorcycle trail.
No, you only need a trail that's wide enough for the vehicle to pass down through. So if you look at my Jeep outside, it's about all the wider it needs to be. So the 17-mile or 17.5-foot trail width that was discussed, that's not necessarily the entire trail tread surface. That may be for 500 feet, it's the width of the vehicle, and then it splits 2 directions. Okay, goes up and around a tree or comes back down so vehicles can pass. Okay. So essentially we lay out trail design. It's done with a 50-foot width where the alignment can go. So the main entrance that goes up. You put the map on.
Yep.
Should be great. I really appreciate you guys letting me talk.
Right in front of the camera.
Sorry.
I don't know if
So
there's-
essentially the pink line here,
Sorry, people.
this is
online.
more or less where the 17.5-foot wide trail is going to go. When it gets to this point, it probably won't be 17.5 feet wide until it gets to there. There's going to be a couple intersections where it does.
So I didn't get the outside of that. So you're saying there's not much here for the truck?
The pink line there is what we call an access road. And then once it gets to that top point there, that's called the trailhead entrance. So the 2 white and black symbols on the map there are emergency access points only.
So I'm not sure what you're saying to me though. Are you saying that? So I'm still not sure what you're saying. I mean, I'm not confused. I don't mean to be difficult.
I have no idea, actually ask the question.
So it doesn't sound like there's a lot of opportunity for trucks and Jeeps there.
There's about 2 miles, it's 2.1 or 1.8 or something like that.
So let me ask you honestly now, and I understand you're all for it, and you know, I've ridden motorcycles and you know, in my day and so on. But you've heard about the concerns here. Do you really think 2 miles of Jeep trails are worth it?
Yes, sir. Because what we're trying to do is build a gateway to the southeast part of the state.
Ah,
We're trying to build a start.
that's right.
And then
So-
we wanna build up from
And that may
And
be.
the intent of that is to bring the tourists to Houston, so that they spend money in Houston, stay at the hotel.
Okay, so he's got a legitimate point. Let me, look. So, thank you.
So it might not be an interconnected trail system, it might be a bunch of different pieces of land, because the land that's owned in southwest Minnesota is primarily private land.
Right, yeah.
And large chunks of the state land that's down here is non-recreational land.
And I definitely read where users like, and by the way, I appreciate you bringing out these issues because it gives us a chance to talk in more detail and so that people are informed. Which is really the problem here in Houston is a lack of information. But, so, yes, the issue I have with that is that the idea that this is a gateway, the opportunity to build more, and I understand that users like interconnected trails. So how many people here is it for whom is it a surprise over the last several days that more trails were planned? Is that a
You don't
surprise?
actually know who planners, like.
So look at the
definitely
hands. Say, this is a surprise. So if, here's my point.
It's more of a goal. than it's really-
Well, yeah, but you don't go backwards on trail. Once the trail's there, it's there, right? Cover a lot of money taking things out. Whereas,
Well, you would agree with us.
what's that?
You would agree trail closure does happen.
Yes.
Would you agree it happened in the state of Minnesota in 2005 during the phase of the forestry classification project?
I don't know what that project is.
You should probably read into it.
Okay. So the point is this, that if the clubs and Parks and Trails and DNR would have come to the citizens of Winona and said, what's that?
Houston.
I'm sorry, Houston. God forbid.
So we didn't come to them.
Yeah. So they would have come to Houston and said, we want to build and hopefully have a goal of building a complex of trails near and around your bluffs. And we're going to start with this 7-mile trail. And it is very difficult to put in with this terrain, the soil and so on and so forth. It's going to have to manage, excuse my French, we're going to have to manage the hell out of this thing. And frankly, you're probably not going to make any money on this initial 7-mile trail because the data overwhelmingly demonstrates that there ain't a profit coming on the 7-mile trail.
Is that peer reviewed data?
It is multiple peer reviewed data.
So how much
Multiple
money have I
pieces
spent-
of, what's
How
that?
much money have I spent in town since I've been here since 6 o'clock? I'll be here till Wednesday. I'll be at the open house on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about you, we're talking about average HEV here. The overwhelming research says that they're gonna come for one visit during the day, they're not gonna stay all night. What they're gonna do is buy a sandwich and a tank of gas, maybe. Now, that's the visitors. Now, people who live here, they might use the trail and really enjoy it, a lot of them, right? But that doesn't add to the economy, because they already spend their money. So we're talking, now hang on just a minute, hang on. So we're talking about bringing these people in. Overwhelming research demonstrates that a trail of this size is not going to bring in very many people, except for your trucks and Jeeps who are going to travel across the state for this 1.5 mile trail that they can drive on. Okay, now hang on, just a minute. So if you guys in DNR would have come and said that to Houston and said, you're really not gonna make any money. And the tourists that we already have tourists in Houston, right? A lot. We do the triathlon, it's the trailhead for the biggest trail across goes into Iowa. We have bikers, we have kayakers, we have canoers. If Houston, and here's my admonition and my scolding for everybody, if you people would get your act together and get behind the people who are trying to build up the tourism in this town and stop tackling them from behind, you wouldn't even have to consider something like this.
But here, I'm kind of an expert on a lot of this. Everybody knows a lot about something. And I'm gonna tell you what I'm an absolute expert on. There's not a lot of people who would argue with me. I have done research for 20 years on different types of tourists. What they want, what they don't want, what they avoid, what they will run away from. And I'm telling you that, and I can tell you better, and I'm not being braggy, and I'm not trying to be, I am braggy, but I come by that answer. If there's something I can say absolutely in this issue, if OHV comes to this town, those tourists that I just showed you pictures of are going to leave. The DNR and the clubs would have come and said, on top of that, you're going to probably lose a lot of your tourism you already have. But take hope, one day we'll build a bigger trail, and if you let the ATVs drive through town, a little muddy, and pull up and buy this one, you can build up a community that would make money. Do you think that this community would have said, let's go, I like that idea?
So in 2009, we did come to a city council meeting. In 2009, we did come to a city council meeting and said exactly what we wanted to do was to build a large.
Did you
trail
say
system.
this?
And because of the land acquisition process, it's been very difficult to actually purchase land. Do you know how many land was purchased here? It was with recreational trail dollars, whether that be FRTD funds, with grant and aid funds, matching those dollars, or other forms of money that's out there available to build recreational trails. But we did say that we want to build a large trail system, and the only thing that we could do was acquire that land to build that trail. I don't want it to be that dense, but that's what we have to work with. And my club wheels on 70 acres in Byron, Minnesota. We've been wheeling there since 1970, and it's on as steep of a slope. The trails are still there. It's private land. If the landowner dies, we can lose access to it. That's why we want to build a 50 or 100-year trail system where we're part of the community.
It's not in town.
It's adjacent to some areas. It's in the country, yes.
This is in town.
So,
Adjacent to town.
so,
No, it's downtown.
It's right in front of the yard.
So if I could use an example of a town that it is in town, I'd say Appleton OHV and Gilbert OHV are literally in town.
They're both farther than this.
But the Genoa Trail runs directly through town, which brings you over to the Iron Range OHV rec area, and the city campground in Gilbert is in town.
And
The Jeeps and trucks are in town. The ATVs and motorcycles are in town.
you know how much Appleton brings in per day? Dollar amount,
I don't know that number.
about $100 per user per day.
And
they
you stated, excuse me, one second. You stated $40 to $30 per user per day. And you're saying Appleton brings $100 per user per day. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so your number up there was extremely misleading.
No. The number I had up there was $25 that local daily averages are 25 to 125, $100+. That range depends upon the length of the trail. How long is the Appleton trail?
It's less than 7.5 months.
No.
no,
Appleton.
no, Apple.
The trails near Appleton are longer than
I've got a trail atlas.
that. And Appleton also does some of the accommodations that I'm talking about. So the food and the lodging and all of the stuff that goes with it. All of the stuff that goes with it, my point is, all of the stuff that goes with it doesn't go with the nature ecotourists that are already here. You don't have to do that. They're already here, right? They have more money and they spend it. More so than ATV, OHV users.
I'm just gonna agree to disagree.
And they're not.
You're right.
I'm just gonna agree to disagree.
Agreeable.
I think that's all
That you
I got
don't-
questions for you.
On what, the mileage or the dollars cent? Oh. And so that's fine. So now, let me ask you one final question. Were you at the Hold Down Days?
Yes, sir. The last
Now,
almost 12 years.
I got word that you were talking about 100,000 visitors.
So what's our year?
250 to 300,000.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm not an expert, so
Whoa,
what I will say is this.
No.
What is our geographic location relative to major metropolitan areas relative to Hamilton or Gilbert? How many large cities are surrounding us within an hour?
I'm not sure.
Lacrosse is on our back door.
Yeah.
Rochester's on our back door. The Twin Cities are on our back door. There are large cities in Iowa.
The 700
people travel to.
The 700-mile trail system in Hatfield McCoy last year had 56,000 visitors. You were a representative of your club in a booth that said information and said 150,000 people are going to show up for a 7-mile trail. And my concern is this, that this, and I understand there's exuberance, and people get excited about their hobbies. But this kind of incomplete information is what causes city councils to move ahead with a project because they assume you know what you're talking about, right? And the issues that have been brought out here tonight were not brought out to the city council when these decisions were made. And I think
They weren't made that late, like 12 years ago.
They were what?
They were not made. They just agreed to pursuing the project.
well, at some point in time, they made a decision. Here's my point. You guys, the DNR, they are all assumed to be experts. And if you say something, people are listening. Words matter.
Yes, sir.
And so if,
Here's my guarantee in my words. I will sustain these trails. I will take care of them. My club.
We don't want them.
Okay, let me ask you a
We're not
question.
kidding.
How are you doing with the Rushford Village? The city of Rushford. The city of Rushford, they're looking for a trail. Read the Fillmore Journal. They don't even want to hear about it. Because they want nothing to do with the OHV. They said, before they would even consider it, they would be asking the townspeople what they thought and what the businesses thought before they'd even think or even bring up the word OHV.
We're not building a trail system in Rushford. I'm not looking at a trail system in Rushford.
It's still OHV, just
So,
slow it down
we did have an open house. We're having another one on Tuesday.
here in Houston. Was it informed? Did you follow everything? Yeah.
The city council and also.
And so-
Yeah, the last one was actually. I didn't know that. I didn't know the last one.
some of your names are
My name is Jeff O'Brien.
Jeff O'Brien. I honestly appreciate you bringing out these issues and the information. Because frankly, at least recently, and by recently, I mean the last couple of years, these issues have not been aired in a very community open kind of manner. So this is really great. I'm going to, if you have something else to say, please say it. Now you're brave souls for seeing, but I'm gonna expand this out and see if anybody else has comments or questions that are constructive or useful for our guests or any of the other experts.
So I did look up the Appleton Area Recreation Park. There's 20 miles of mixed use trails.
There you go.
It did not start out.
Okay, so, and as I said in my presentation, entry level is 20 miles.
My club deals on less.
What's that?
My club wheels on 70 acres.
Well, I'm
They're
sure,
doing it since 70.
I get it, and I sympathize that you guys want trails in this part of the state, and these bluffs are beautiful. But bluff people honestly just don't want it. If the community of Houston had been fully informed of what this involved, it would not have gotten this far.
So does anyone remember walking around the Did anyone read the pamphlets I handed out about 6 years ago? When we walked around town, there was a real.
I never saw one.
It was a really contentious mayor race going on in the county that was growing against the forum.
Okay, and so
So
what
we did walk around town with a bunch of OHV users and hand out pamphlets.
I never saw one myself, and I
was
certainly
certainly
would
never
have read it if I saw it.
I'm sorry you didn't do it.
Nobody got it.
Steve Westby,
That's not true.
Steve Westby,
In a couple days, with some friends, canvassed the entire community. It wasn't that hard to do.
Why would you want, I have a question.
Yep, is it
Why would you want to come? Why would you want to come to a community that you're not wanted? That's what I mean, do you see all these people here?
Yes.
They're not your friends. We don't want you here. We don't want the project. So why are we discussing this as it's going to happen? Because it's not. Not with over 400 people in this community are fighting this. We are together as a
We
coalition.
live here.
We live here. You don't. You have no investment in this community whatsoever.
I've been working on this project.
We don't care.
I don't care. And you've been working on it.
We don't care. We don't want it.
I would be your friend if you weren't wearing that shirt. Yeah,
I love this shirt. So I've been wearing Hawaiian shirt every Friday for 15 years. It's just part of it.
Well, don't change it for me.
And I wear them on the weekends, so I don't have to go to work on them. So.
So are there any other questions for the experts that we have here? Otherwise, I have a little wrap up, John.
I'm just kind of curious as far as, just when, bulldozers and stuff, how much, do they vibrate in the area, you know? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Ron, is that anything you can answer about bulldozers and the vibrations and how that affects things?
Oh, sorry.
This is when they're gonna be doing all this work.
When they're doing this work, yeah.
I wouldn't say that the bulldozing and the construction phase of it would be that crazy. I've been on a lot of construction sites, and I don't think that's a big issue. I think it's the noise following that. And even though the ATV clubs try to monitor noise levels and they're working with people all the time, it's not 100% foolproof thing. I don't know who the police are gonna be to monitor this stuff, but you can't be there all the time. Again, when we have our rides down there towards Iceland, there's some machines that are quite loud. Some aren't, some are okay. Some of the motorcycles, we private motors. And most of the ATV or side by sides and I don't think the construction, I hope it doesn't go that far. I hope it doesn't get that.
When I worked in the pipeline, I just saw that, and the houses, this would fall, you know.
Get out of that.
I mean, there was, we happen to have a thing up in the hill there.
It's on, just hold it close.
We have a thing up in the hill. Bench.
A memorial.
Memorial for a son, and I'm afraid that that's going to be crashed. We'll call that going on. You know, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Is it, they could be crashed, using somebody to be dangerous.
When did you lose your son?
Suicide.
I'm sorry.
This is, I guess, one point I didn't make during my talk is vibration be a huge factor with snakes and the hibernation and coming out of hibernation too soon. The only thing I can think of parallel with that is last couple of years in one of the oil fields, there was a lot of vibration and things. A lot of the gopher snakes came up prematurely and all died and were frozen. So vibration with snakes, because they have no ears, is a huge factor that can alter their behavior.
Guys, one more question. This question is for round miners. When was the last time you constructed a driveway? Or planned a driveway?
I retired, I think. I think it's probably been 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. I'm not currently doing that work right now. I don't know what you're getting at there, but I wanted to get back to the soil types a little bit again in this area here. And you had talked about a trail someplace you were using that stayed in good condition the whole time. And that depends an awful lot on soil types. You know, you can't compare a clay soil or a black soil to a sandy loam. It's just, they're just not comparable. And and again, the trails, when you say the trails stay in good shape, that is said could be possible with enough hardening, enough water breaks, enough this, enough that. The trail itself could maintain. It's the side slopes, it's the sloughing of those soils on those side slopes when you get significant rainfalls. Our annual rainfall here in Houston County is 4.3 inches every 24 hours. And like I said, we've had 15 to 17. That was an extreme storm. It was, but
1,500.
it's a 100-year event. It seems to be coming more often. At least a 10-year and 25-year. Our storms are getting more violent. You see the changes in the weather all the time. And so that concerns me. If you start opening these slopes up, that much open land in that tight of an area is risky, very risky.
We were talking about, you were talking about 10 to 12% rates for trail construction or driveway construction. Most of the trail that is designed there is actually less than 10%. 10% of the trail design. I think with manual,
There's a difference between the trail slope and the land slope.
it's measurable. Yeah, so it's
Are you talking trail slope or land
trust.
trail?
Yeah, you're familiar with actual control.
Yes. Yes.
Water catchments. and
All kinds of damage barriers, all kinds of retention stuff. Without doubt, you'll be increasing the velocities on this overland flow. When you cut a trail in, and that water comes down that slope, and it's heading to someplace that had not headed to before. And now you're putting in these catch basins, you're putting in riprap, or you're putting in something. You're still increasing the velocities, and when it leaves that dissipation point, it's still increased, and it's going across into the area that had not.
I'd like to ask the gentleman, very pretty. So you have a response to the data that was presented tonight about the noise pollution that the community is concerned about, those of us who live right below the bluffs, and for the rattlesnake habitat, haven't heard that addressed directly by your.
So I've been hiking up here for a long time. I've never seen a rattlesnake. Can anyone tell me that they physically witnessed?
I caught 3 of them on python rattlesnakes with the DNR. Unlicensed. I caught 3 right there on Grand Street.
So the
Don't
rattlesnakes,
tell me there's not rattlesnakes.
the rattlesnakes from this site are very often found in this area and down to Grant Street. They're repeatedly found here. Their source, it can be no place else other than here. So I think Dan can talk about how often you would encounter them and actually see them.
It's really unpredictable. You don't know where to look. I've doing this for half a century. Almost, you can go where you know the snakes are on a perfect day and not see the snake. It's really difficult to say I'm going to target and find a timber rattlesnake for sure on a given day. There's even publications by people far more famous than me in terms of snake research say timber rattlesnakes are where and when you find them. Granted, if you know where a den is, you might be able to go to that. But the dens that are known, the state does not disclose to people taking the snakes for the dens. But the snakes are there.
An online question that we received is what happens if the construction comes across a den?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if they come across the den, they should stop. It's a protected species. As I understand it, though, they're trying to avoid what they think are damning areas, prime habitat. But as I mentioned in my talk, the snakes just don't stay in those areas. They're likely to be there in the early spring and in the fall. They don't stay there. They move.
What about noise?
So we did a noise study in the township. We were trying to build a trail system on a 40-acre abandoned property. The loudest vehicle that showed up on the noise study that day was a tractor. So we're doing a sound study here coming up in a couple of weeks after the open house. But that data will be available. So what we're going to do is run vehicles on the site back there, put sound meters in town, and do an actual scientific study because the last one wasn't very good.
Who's doing it? Yeah, who's doing it?
This will be a joint effort between the Coalition of Recreational Trail, the Coalition of Recreational Trail Users, the state of Minnesota, and a licensed contractor.
I don't know why we're even doing it.
Let me ask you a
Well, I
question.
know myself, I believe it was just last week in a race sheet. There was about 7 or 8 OHV, one right by the front of my house. I got the windows shut, I've got the air conditioning on, and the windows were rattling and I could hear all 7 as they went by. Now, if I can hear that in town, Lord help me, what's gonna happen, you're up on the bluff. And that sound's coming downhill. You can't tell me I'm not gonna hear an OHV on the hill.
So there's a trail system I go through now in Harlow, Kentucky, which is another one of those mine areas. And it's got 10,000 acres of OHV recreation trails, and there's 3 towns in the bottom of those valleys. And they embrace OHV recreation.
What do we?
Let me ask you a question about sound. I would just bring across something I have to just, I didn't hit it real hard in the presentation. There's an amazing amount of lobbying going on from clubs, associations, and Polaris and so on. It's just incredible. But one of them mentioned, maybe you know about this, up in, I think it was the Iron Range, that they were installing a trail and they had provided a 6-acre sound buffer. So why would they have a 6-acre sound buffer and there's nothing like that here?
There's a 20-acre sound buffer in the northeast corner. The whole South Park area is a sound buffer. And the only unfortunate part, due to restricted land access, is that we can't get into the trail system without having an access point. And currently that comes in from the northwest corner, from the parking area, which is shaded in gray, follows the pink section down. And then there is geographic sound buffer there by elevation where the hillside goes up. And all of the trees and vegetation in that area will create a sound buffer. It does. Even in the winter, if the trails aren't open in the winter, you don't have it. Snow is amazing. Also, we're not talking about doing trail riding at night, so we would have to follow state regulations as far as noise limits.
We just have to listen to you all day long, right?
You have to listen to the highway through town.
We have to listen to you all day long.
I have a question for Ron. Ron, I have a question regarding just the soil and the possible erosion. with the size of the trails that are coming in, it's likely that they're gonna have to pull down trees, vegetation. What is that going to do to the integrity of the hill?
Trying to follow your question. You're asking about when all the stuff was removed,
Yeah,
what's that going to do to the soil health?
just the integrity of the soil and just.
Anytime you disturb soil, anytime you disturb soil, it takes a long time to rebound, to be able to grow any kind of vegetation. It takes years to get that stuff established. You can come in with, again, hydro seeders, you can come in with heavy mulch, pinned mulch, fabrics, some of that stuff has got the seed combined right in it and everything. And even then, the very best scenario is to get a light vegetation started, but it's gonna be difficult. The areas close to those cut banks and those fill banks will be shaded. And they'll be in competition with other species that wanna come in. And when I think about japes or side by side using a trail that's tight, I just can't hardly believe there won't be a little scuffing here and a little scuffing there on the sides. You just can't help it when you're running trails like that. I run a side by side, and it's not a perfect situation all the time trying to keep that thing right on the track.
So Ron, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question. I read about the reclamation where they're reclaiming these trails and they're getting rid of the trail and they're trying to restore it. You know, a trail like this, God forbid, I'm just saying, what if you had to restore? How long would it take for a system like this to be really recovered?
You know, if all the circumstances are right, you don't get heavy rainfalls, you don't get significant storm events during the recovery process. It could restore itself in 2-3 years. You know, some of it could come back and revegetate. You're not going to see it, you know, because of the canopy and everything. I mean, who's going to go out and keep an eye on that when it's trying to restore it? When I came down the Houston Hill tonight, I was just kind of, because we're coming to a conference here on ATV trails. Even the Houston Hill, that winding hill that goes up through there, you can see where that's giving away even in some areas on that. And you can see there's some areas that restored nicely back and some haven't gotten back to where they need to be yet. But getting vegetation established on sandy loam soils, getting things regenerated there is a very, very tricky endeavor.
But I would assume there's also some issues about, if we damage those prairies, we don't just get those back. And the wildlife that lives there, we don't just get those back. Rattlesnakes don't come back. They're gone forever once they're gone. That's it. And I know we have somebody in the back. Can you let us know what you see?
I have a question, as far as the erosion and the soil. And so what effect might that have, or could that possibly have on our, people who have private wells and also our city wells? What effect might it have on our wells?
You know, I can't really speak to that on the well issue. I would think that there would be much effect on the well, but I don't see how that might be possible. And even the sediment deliveries that are it's so hard to measure that when you've got concentrated flows or heavy rainfalls, you've got open land like that, what that's delivering to the river and what's delivering to your wetlands and the floodplain. It's hard to measure all. And but you can be certain there's going to be some sediment loss in those areas. You can't help it. Sediment issue. But as far as the water quality of the wells, I can't really speak to that. I wouldn't think that would be a concern.
There's another online. So there is an online question that wasn't addressed to any particular expert, so I'm hoping whichever one knows can jump in. The question asked was, how might this affect the wildlife that's by the school? How about the geese, the forms of ducks, the swans, etc.? And I'm assuming they might be talking about the erosion or the land change.
Anybody want to say anything, or should I say something?
Again, I don't know if I caught all the question, but I think you asked how it was going to affect the wildlife in the areas near the school.
There's a pond by the school.
Oh. Well,
Is that it?
Well, it's,
again, I would think that distance, it would be a minimal impact. I can't believe that far away would have any impact on wildlife there. I keep looking at that yellow area on the map there, Carla, and that, I think you told me was a camping area?
There is a campsite there.
Archery range?
And an archery range there.
Okay. And but there again, you've got other people using that. I can't see how you can really use that as a sound barrier. When you've got people that are actively using that site.
Can you pull up the top picture of that?
Yes, let me see if I can pull up the topo.
so I don't have a question from the online, but I do have just a comment. We have someone that was saying that they live up by Chatfield and there was a trail put in up there and that it was very noisy and the herons and the ducks have left the Lynch Creek up by Chatfield due to the noise.
Okay, can I share the screen? Can you help me share that?
Tell you what.
So the mouse pointer is on the front knoll. And all of City South Park is on the north side of that slope. And it actually drops back down the elevation.
Where is it?
On the south end.
Does it show up?
More or less.
Oh, show all
line
windows.
there, where City South Park goes down for the archery range. There's a low point
There
there.
it is. That one.
And actually making for emergency access at the City South Park there is going to be challenging.
So, so basically,
To the west or to the east.
yep, so this is where the trail system comes in, comes up the hill here. And then it splits here into individual trails that go in different places. And so you're looking at the archery range, is that what you want to see? Okay, so that is right there.
Backside of that hill drops down.
Yep, this drops down to a ravine right here. So,
There used to be a horseback trail that rode always that's on it.
so it
There might
comes.
just be a hiking trail there.
Comes down, the ravine runs down through here. So where the trail's down in the ravine is probably not going to be an issue, but where it's up on the hillsides is absolutely where the sound is going to transmit into town. And then it's going to do funky things in here. So I'm speaking from, so in case people don't know, I mean, like I'm an owl person, but I do acoustic research on owls. So I've done transmitter work with owls. I've read all kinds of books on the physics of sound. So I understand this because I work here and I've done this. Okay, so when you get into a round curvy thing like this, the sound's gonna get really unpredictable and do weird things in there. But here, where it's a clear shot into town, that's going to be an issue, as well as where it wraps around the hill. Let's see if I can back up there. Turn it.
So as an expert of sound, can you tell me what the main trajectory is of sound?
The main trajectory,
Of an owl?
it's a ray, like light. It just goes out. It doesn't go up, it goes out.
When it hits the ground, it bounces.
It can, yes. But I live 5 miles out of town. When they do the tractor pull during hoedown days, I hear that 5 miles straight out of town. That's not.
That is not what we're looking for. It's not a tractor.
No, it's not, but if I've worked in Houston for, I don't know, 20 years or more. And I can tell you when there's a chainsaw cutting on that hill, at the nature center on the other side of town, you can hear it. And one of the differences between this and most other trails is the elevation. That helps sound to transmit. We have a speaker up here because we want people to hear it. We don't put the speaker on the floor. When it's up high, it transmits farther and better. Okay?
Less things that it hits, right?
Well, and also, yeah, it's gonna go farther. So when this is up higher, if you're standing on that hill, When you're at the top of the hill and you look out, you can see town because you're not looking at many trees. If you were looking down, you look through a lot of vegetation. The sound's not going to travel as well through that vegetation. But when you look out, you're not looking through more than a couple of trees. That sound will carry into town very well. And I can tell you that a chainsaw up there, you can hear at the nature center just fine. And the Gilbert Trail and the Appleton Trail are both farther from town than this is. And I called both city halls to ask what people thought, where do they shop, what do they do? And both of them at their city hall said, you can't hear the trail from town. That will not be the case here. You will hear it in town. The folks that the Trails Unlimited folks made that clear, and they said it may actually violate state noise standards. They're the experts, and they question if that could even be done legally. And then we have the noise ordinance, which is less restrictive than state law. That says if Larry Connery, who has this trail, Larry's house is there, and the trail goes all the way around his house, on the hill above his house. You can't put in a nice little buffer around his house because it wraps all the way around his house. If that disturbs the enjoyment of his property, that's a violation of the noise ordinance of our town, and he's within the city. It has to not do that. It can't impact people's property values, and it can't negatively impact the enjoyment of their property to be not violate ordinance. What is that called there? Constitutional. Oh, you can't take property rights from people without whatever. So there's a lot of issues there. But since I have this up though, I want to show a couple more things. So let me just quick rip this around because we weren't able to see before. Thank you very much. These are the bluff prairies that it's going through. The trails go down through this is the nicest bluff prairie there.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
It goes through the lower part of this bluff prairie, it goes through the upper part of the bluff prairie, it cuts through this bluff prairie, and the technical trail comes through the side of it. It pretty much, every prairie you see, it goes through. It goes through this one, it goes through this one over here. It goes through the best denning areas possible on the site. So I'm curious what the clubs think about that. Do you just not care? So why would you want to put this here if it's going to significantly impact a state-threatened species that has no ability to move to another site? That doesn't sound like you care. Right, exactly. The goal of this presentation was to bring out information that has not been shared publicly, that the DNR has specifically not let their staff share with the public. The DNR is aware of all of this, has been all the way through. They just don't want the public to know this information. And they've gone to very sloppy lengths to not do an environmental review. So at this stage, there will be no formal environmental review of this trail alignment at all. None.
The only thing I will say is there is nothing I can say that if you want to care about this project or that other, which you care about the journey. It's not gonna happen, so I'm just not gonna argue.
I appreciate that.
That's the only thing I'm saying.
I appreciate that. So there's one other thing I want to pull up. Stop this. This is just a quickie. Because I want to put forth one other idea. So if the DNR is not standing up to protect the rare species that are there, who's going to? And I'm a naturalist, so I think we should, right? I mean, we've got a lot of stuff we should be proud of and we can be taken care of. So there's stuff we can do. The prairies up there, they could use a little bit of work. Some of them are good. Some of them could use a little bit of help. We can do that. It's not a gigantic effort. We can help those rare species up there. We can remove the invasive species. Oh, one question I did want to ask, because the DNR keeps bringing it up. is that clubs can do invasive species removal. And I went to all the clubs' websites and there's nothing on there about clubs doing invasive species removal. Do you do that?
Never had an expert approach us to love to do it.
Okay.
Just remember cleanup down in Bell Plain and all over 1 million tons of trash. If we
Okay.
had an expert to guide us, that would be awesome.
So who would that expert
I
be?
pulled buckthorn out of my yard, I pulled buckthorn out of my neighbor's yard.
So
I
basically,
agree invasive species.
the
are-
DNR is just saying, if somebody led you, you might do that.
Do you wash
Um,
your vehicles off before you bring them in?
So there's a program in the state of Minnesota
Where's the other
called Clean
microphone?
Play Go.
Oh.
Or Play Clean Go. It's where you wash the vehicle after you're done playing. The intent of that parking area up there is to actually have a wash.
But that's not in the plan anywhere to have a wash station.
We haven't got to that point in the project.
Where's the well?
I mean, there's already a, yeah,
The well would have to be dug.
that's
These
not
are all-
in,
these
that's
are
not
all
in the
things
grant
that have to be
proposal,
built.
that's not in the trail proposal, that's not in there at all. That's not been in any written document anywhere.
It would come out of grant and aid dollars and their efforts.
Oh, can I go back to that?
I was
quite
trying to share it because it
done.
wasn't
Oh,
shared on Zoom.
sorry.
Well, there's a wash station up at the fire range, which rec area, there's a wash station at the Appleton, which rec area.
Is it
Can't
this
see
one?
why there wouldn't be the ability for one.
Can I ask one
Yes.
quick question?
That one.
This trail that we're speaking of, the club is going to maintain it, am I correct or incorrect?
Clubs.
Clubs,
Yes.
how close are these clubs?
Well, there's the Bluff Country ATV Club, which have residences in the area. There's a club out of Crescent. There's a club in Rochester that has people that live in St. Charles and all the other surrounding small towns up here. We hold a, what is this small town? It's, I've got. club
Well,
members
my
that are
question
all
is that
self-sufficient.
your clubs are gonna maintain this. Are they all gonna be willing to drive at least once a day or once a week to keep this trail up? To pick the trash up during the week?
There won't be trash.
There'll be dead trees down. That's a regular occurrence.
Yes, there is, yeah. So the state of Minnesota has the Trail Ambassador Program, which is for trail monitors. Those are people that volunteer to ride the trail system routinely and monitor noise, whatever, report it. Monitor tree down conditions, notify the clubs to go out and do it. There's not just truck people, we're talking about ATV users, we're talking about motorcycle users, we're talking about a lot
So who
that are willing
coordinates
to
that?
volunteer.
Who coordinates that?
It's coordinated through the Houston OHV, which is made up of the Rochester Rough Riders, and also some jumpers, Colorado Crescent, Colorado Rushford, the Bluff Country Wheelers, Golden Eagle Motorcycle Club. We're talking about a lot of
That's since 2017.
I sit on different, I used to sit on different councils with all these people, and I talk to them on a regular basis every year.
Talk to them.
So the committee hasn't met since 2017.
The
So-
city, the committee hasn't officially met since 2017.
Yep. So
And that
anyway,
was due to DNR, because Jess Altown, who is the Southeast regional person down here, she kind of stopped there.
she was too busy in her job.
She was very busy, she didn't know what's-
There's a difference.
She kind of stunk her.
She didn't get, she would have had, if you had as much on your plate as she did, I don't.
I run an
think
aerospace
this was-
insurance shop for a living. I play on the plate.
So if the other option is to keep South Park as quiet as it is and keep our town as quiet as it is, make sustainable hiking trails. So the one thing I absolutely agree with you on is South Park is right for tourism and enjoyment and appreciation. It is an amazing place up there. It is awesome. There are fantastic overlooks, the vegetation, the wildlife. It's fantastic. It should be used. I agree wholeheartedly with that. But we should do something a heck of a lot more low impact, like hiking trails. And if we could have a variety of loops, that gives stuff for our residents in town, regardless of if they can afford to buy an expensive machine, they can use that also. And it also is a selling point for real estate agents. You can say, hey, we've got fantastic hiking trails in town, rather than we have to disclose that there's an OHV trail up there. Those are very different things. And
Are you moving here?
So I own land on the river because there's an OHV park.
do you want a house or land?
Oh, man,
A house or land?
I'm gonna build this house.
Go for it. So if Russ has talked about tourism, and one of the things with tourists is the longer they stay, as he said, the more likely they are to spend more money in town. The more things we have for our existing tourists that we do already have, pre-COVID, the Owl Center brought in, and we're just small at this stage. We brought in 12,000 people into town. We did more programs than that, but 12,000. Our July this year was the busiest it's ever been. So we're increasing. When we build a new center, it's going to be a whole lot more. So when you take our visitors, Russ just did a quick and dirty survey for us. Our visitors, what do they do otherwise in Houston when they're here? 56% do nothing else in Houston. They come to the Owl Center and leave. They don't feel like there's anything else to do. Some eat at baristas, some eat at JT, some use the parks. But that's the thing that they're looking for. We've got bike trail, we've got natural playground, lots of them with families do that. But if we also had this, which would be a significant hiking trail, they put hours in there, then we're more of a destination. It's more likely they're going to stay here longer, more likely to stay overnight. And we can enhance the experience for our existing tourists that we already have. So that's what I personally would like to see, but obviously I have a very significant bias towards nature.
Are we gonna have somebody from our committee on that study?
Well, the city council said I can be present. So that is a fair question. It is a fair question because I talked to a resident that lives immediately adjacent to the Gilbert Trail. Now, the DNR has said over and over again, we've never gotten a complaint about the Gilbert Trail, and apparently they haven't. But the person I talked to that lives next to it, I said, why haven't you complained? And he said, what the good would that do? So it's not that the people that live adjacent to it think it's fine. He's very not okay with it. I called this guy out of the blue. He has no idea who I am. And I said, my name is so-and-so, and he obviously wanted to hang up on me. And I said, and I'm calling you because our town wants to build an OHV trail. And he said, don't let him do it. And we had a very long talk about how they did their noise study. And he said the first time the vehicles came through, normal speed, zipping around like they normally do, failed the noise study. So they built a berm to prevent the noise because it physically blocks the noise. And then he climbed up his ladder because he couldn't see because of the berm to see what they did. And he said they basically idled by. So that's how you fake a noise study and make it not accurate. So the city council has said that I can be present, although nobody has told me yet when it was going to be.
I will be sure to let you know when it is. Can I talk about, did you know a trail though? Because that's a trail design.
Well, this is Gilbert that I'm talking about.
I'm
not
talking
Gilbert.
about, well, the trail you are talking about is actually the trail, and it goes right past the residential area. And it's literally, it's up an old mining road, it's straight. It's like one of the east-west. I'll cut it out for everybody so they can see what I'm talking about. But had they detoured that trail down the hill onto the slope and gone around that area, and made everyone slow down and enjoy the view, you wouldn't have those complaints in that neighborhood. It's literally like a road right next to
I don't think you're talking about where I'm talking about, because here's the city of Gilbert, here's the trail, and he's right, the bulk of the trail, and he's right at the south
I've been
side.
trying to reroute part of the trail for about 6 years and getting nowhere to do it.
Oh, you don't get anywhere to be either.
I've been doing this for 13, 12 years on this project, and it stinks. It's really unfortunate. Part of it, yeah. Had they not opposed the state forest systems down in 2005, or at least done a better job of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 for classification, we wouldn't be trying to build the trail system because all of the trails were not opposed. They could have easily been fixed and or rerouted.
So Iowa has a magnificent program that makes sense to me. So Gilbert was built in an old iron mine. Appleton was built in an old gravel pit. They weren't built on very nice habitat with rare species. Iowa has a program that's like total win-win. So the mining companies normally, when they abandon part of the mine, have liability for 10 years on that abandoned mine. But now due to legislation, if the mining company donates it to a county or the state for an OHV park, they're completely absolved of liability and there's an extra place to ride. To me, that is a win-win because clearly there's an absolute demand for this.
Are there any mines in southeast Minnesota?
There were indeed iron mines in southeast Minnesota.
I would love to work on one of those large sites.
Well, it's actually, I believe, kind of a wildlife refuge now.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
It's
and
also part
wildlife
of
is
the
the problem.
solution. You know, I'm talking about this land is not available for OHV users. We're trying to build trails, but everywhere we turn, we shut down.
Yeah, so I did look in the legislature for state laws, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looked like there was a law that said OHV trails could not be built on state land or state forest land within the Richard J. Dorr Memorial Forest.
Certain parts of the motorist, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, it sounded like everything was.
It's a large portion of it.
Yeah, and
Which
that's
is why we
probably,
purchased private land.
Yep.
And changed the use on the walk-on land to do this project.
right, so I think the reason the state probably did it is because it's not an environmentally friendly thing to do.
To create a park in the state of Minnesota, you have to have legislation put through. We tried to get legislation put through, it didn't happen. So the DNR said, build a granite trail, have the club sponsor, have the club put the work in, have the club do the effort. We've been working on that process.
Okay, so a question came up about,
And that's frustrated with them.
oh, I believe that. I definitely believe that. So one of the questions that's come up is the city administrator has said, and the DNR has said to some degree, that if we back out of this trail, the city's gonna have to pay back all the money they got, plus take the land back, plus not be able to get grants.
So the OHV users of the state, if this falls through, we're not gonna go after the city for this money. We're gonna go after the DNR for the money to be returned to our account, because the DNR wants to retain ownership of that, and that's not. The city should not be held accountable for the screw up of the DNR, for the failure of the project. We're going to sue the DNR, is what's gonna happen.
Yeah, thank you.
We're gonna stand toe to toe with you guys and do the right thing.
And I think the finger's getting pointed at the right place because the DNR has not been honest with our community about this project.
Well, it's just a general comment.
I'm not saying anything there, but, so anyway, I asked the Joe Unger, who's the DNR point person for this project, very point blank. I said, has the DNR determined the amount the city has to repay if they exit the project? And here's what the city is saying: would they take back the land and the money? And does the city have to repay what was reimbursed to the clubs? So this is the response that Joe gave. DNR Parks and Trails has requested DNR Legal's help in determining the exact amount that would be required if the city council decided not to proceed with the project. Once we receive more information on the exact amount, we will be communicating that information to the city. And I don't believe that's been communicated, so I believe.
Joe's stuck in a tough position there, trying to answer a question he doesn't know the answer to, because the lawyers haven't told him what to say.
Correct, which means the information our city has is not the final
It's
answer.
not.
Okay.
It's incorrect.
So that's what our community needs to know, because we're being threatened with this and everybody's terrified of our taxes doubling.
No, that's
Okay,
why I'm sitting
thank
here
you.
tonight, is to address that point and
Thank
answer
you.
questions.
We have a new group that's being formed that's sending out information and tax statements for 2022 to scare the residents that our taxes are doubling and manipulating tax statements and posting them on their site. And those are the people that are for you and they're posting that.
Their names and
I'm sorry.
information.
Yeah.
Friends of Houston County.
Yes. And they're manipulating these statements and they're putting them out there and making people get quite
I
scared.
don't know who owns the Facebook page. It's pretty easy to create a Facebook page. It's also pretty easy to find out who owns a Facebook page.
Well,
We
we know.
know this. But thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, that's just.
And then there's termination clauses. So, I mean, it's not, nothing is set in stone. They may do this, they might do that. And the different contracts are slightly different. And they say that upon termination, the subgrantee will be entitled to payment determining on a pro rata basis for services satisfactorily performed. Well, we did do the environmental assessment. That was satisfactorily performed. The Trails Unlimited document was satisfactory. So is that going to be, I mean, yeah, this is all up in the air. And thank you for confirming that it's not a done deal. That's what I understood. It's not what our city council understands. And our residents have been feeling quite threatened by that.
I think there's a ton of false information going on there, and none of the clubs in the state of Minnesota are pulling that crap, because how would we ever be able to start another trail system if that was the outcome of this?
Thank you.
There's no way.
I'm also quite sure that there are some state legislators that would come to our rescue on this.
Okay. All right, I think we've been here. Wow, it's almost 10. So thank you all for hanging in here and for the interest, and thank you especially for coming and speaking. Very much appreciated. And thank you all for coming and learning more. Please share this with other people because the goal is to have everybody be informed. And please come to the open, you'll be at the open house on Tuesday night?
Yeah, the open house.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I want to say thank you to everyone that's listening to me.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
I'll end it. Yeah.